already recording. All right, hey guys, welcome back. Choices Not Chances. Tonight we're going to talk to a wealth of knowledge, let's say, and to read off his resume is definitely more than a couple of breaths. Brad Moses is going to join us tonight, and we're going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about commanding some of the most elite troops on the planet. We're going to talk about the different levels of command and the way that the landscape of those jobs change as the command gets higher, be it through strategy, through politics, and not politics in the general sense, but politics in the sense of the Marine Corps. And then we're going to talk about his life ventures that he's got going on now. So without further ado, Brad Moses, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you coming out, man.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate being here. And if this podcast helps one person in any way look at life a little bit differently post-service or in service, then I'm happy to help you in any way I can. I know you said you wanted to start at the end. I'm going to throw an audible and go back just a few years and then catch up, because I think for the audience it's going to make sense. After a 26 and a half year career in the United States Army, predominantly in special operations, 75th Rangers and Special Forces, I retired as an 06. November will be 3 years ago. Made that decision not lightly, and we'll cover that later on, but it was the right time for me and my family. I've got two sons, and grateful that my wife was able to stay with me for my entire career, and we're still together. Being that we were both East Coasters, she's East Coast Canada, I was New Jersey, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Made a decision with the vote from the boys. We've got a 24-year-old and just turned 21-year-old in Vegas last weekend, hockey player out of UNCW. They got a vote, and they said they wanted to stay in North Carolina. Being that I was at Fort Bragg for predominance of my career, 22 of the 26 years, they are Carolinians, and that's where they wanted to stay. So one lives in Raleigh, one's home but going to college now after a semi-professional career with hockey over the last 4 years. So, I know you've had Dave and a couple others coming out of the Honor Foundation. That is what helped assist me get through that process, which I call the deficit of hope, that every service man or woman, regardless of the branch of service, goes through when they make that decision to step out of the uniform. And the Honor Foundation did a good job helping me do that kind of Simon Sinek squishy find your why. And I realized I didn't know what I wanted to do that was going to make me happy. But there was 5 criteria for success post-career. It's live where you work, like what you do, like who you work with, make good money, and manage your own time. And everybody defines those things a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. And at that time in my life, our youngest son was getting ready to graduate high school, so it was a good stepping out point. I knew I had the benefits of my career in service to help support them going through their advanced education journeys. So we made a decision with the boys' vote to move east. So weirdly enough, you got a retired Green Beret living here in Raider Nation in eastern North Carolina, and we love it. Honestly, it took a long time to build a house, but I'm five miles from where we're sitting right now, and couldn't be happier with the location. Yeah. But that didn't equal what I was going to do for a living, right? And so in my journey with the Honor Foundation, I had 2 coaches. Initially, one guy, Brad Takala, was a real estate corporate realtor, so buying big company businesses and headquarters. And at the waning time of COVID, that wasn't working out so well for him. But he was doing God's work, helping a bunch of special operations men and women transition out of service. My coaching sessions with him were every Friday afternoon, and they turned into telling Green Beret stories. So it wasn't overly helpful, and he introduced me to, at the time, a 37-year-old female entrepreneur that had never served in any formation within DOD. And her name's Callie Goth, and super transitional help. And all I needed was her to tell me what I didn't know I needed to hear. And it was, she had coached 2 NSW guys in prior classes, never been around a Green Beret. She said, hey, let's spend a few minutes talking about what it is that Green Berets do. So in that journey of talking, about 30 minutes into it, she goes, let me get this straight. So have you ever been in a situation where the outcome was unknown and the risk was really high? I said, Callie, I just told you what Green Berets do for a living, what I've been doing for the last several years in the GWOT. She goes, okay, you're an officer in service. Yep. She goes, so every year to 2 years, you're transitioning. She goes, I don't see how that's any different from this current transition. I said, well, it is, because in service, they tell you what your next job is. And there is some stability in that. And she goes, well, you're going to retire at 26 plus years. That's 67% of your current pay. You've got stability and income. I still don't see what your concern is. And I really needed her to tell me that. And her advice was establish an LLC, do some consulting work in different industries, out of defense, in defense, whatever you want. Just realize you're going to get taken advantage of for a little bit, but it's going to be great lessons learned. Get an internship if you can, and then go from there, and you'll start to find the path that you feel comfortable with and how to do that. The other part that she said was never stop giving back to the people that you loved, that you cared for, and you came from. And this wasn't about my family. That was an important part of my transition as well, because I'd been away from them for so many years. But I said, okay, that's good. So I did an internship with Leader Solutions and Decision Support, former Command Sergeant Major Terry Peters, that was one of my mentors, started his own consulting company. And I said, well, I'd love to come intern with you and get my feet wet, and I don't want to touch anything defense related. So we did, and we were doing gaps and needs analysis for different companies around the United States, out in LA, some in Fayetteville area, and others we were doing remotely. Boston was another one for a security company, Riot Games out in LA, and then one government contract company, Strategic Solutions Unlimited in Fayetteville. So I did those gaps and needs analysis. It really helped me out. I got to be around people that were not like the people I had spent the last 26 plus years with, and it was extremely helpful. Around that same time, Lieutenant General retired Darcy Rogers had become the president of the Special Forces Charitable Trust. He said, hey, I think we could use some help there from a guy that's getting out of service that's still pretty close to the command, and I need your help working on a consulting job with a defense contract company up in Western Virginia. When he, as you may or may not know, when general officers retire, they have a period of carryover that they can't work on certain contracts that have acquisition vehicles that they had when they were in command. Right? So he was an advisor to this company. As an 06, there's no restrictions, so retired 06. So he said, come on board, I need you to help me build this program. And what I was asked to do, I was given 8 months to do it. We did it in 4 with less people and less money. Typical thing for somebody coming out of service, and my pay rate was absolute garbage. So I enjoyed it. I did, and it was what Callie told me. You're gonna get taken advantage of. You're gonna learn a lot. And I had about 5 different consulting gigs going on at the same time. While I'm trying to build my house out here on the coast, it took 20 months. I had to move off installation. I'm in a temporary rental. I've got my family shit in 4 locations and storage. And now I'm working five jobs simultaneously, right? And so I'm like, this isn't exactly what I wanted to. And I knew I wasn't going to, some people say, hey, when you get out of service, take a year off. The world's always moved too slow for me. So there's no fucking way I was going to take a year off. Yeah. But feel my way around on something that I thought I'd like. When I left service, I thought I am not going to work in the defense industry. But to be quite frank, that's the language I spoke. I knew that I could do that. But I wanted to do it in an aspect of where I wasn't just selling the next gun holster, Mickey Thompson radials to my old unit, whatever it is. I just wasn't going to be that guy because, when I commanded 3rd Special Force Group, I had retired GOs come in and try to use the advantage of the relationship I had with them to try and sell their wares from whatever contract defense company they were with. And it just kind of turned my skin. I didn't want to be that guy. And it's not who I am as a human. So one of the companies that I started consulting for at the time was called Crowd Pulse, and it was founded by a former special unit member out of Northern Virginia. 2 guys co-founded this, and they created an algorithm, behavioral-based algorithm that ingests commercial telemetry data. So think about all the stuff on your phone or even coming off your computer, your devices. all that's for sale, right? Mark Zuckerberg's not a bazillionaire because Facebook's free. They're selling your data. That's just the reality of life. Now, you can do it in a manner where you're at a super classified level within defense that has NSA authorities to it, and you can see what people say and they do, and phone numbers and all that PII. This company, what made it different was they're taking the behaviors that people do on a routine basis, applying that against a library in an algorithm on a system, and within seconds, you can take a very large problem globally and shrink it down. So that eventually crowd pulse. I advise.
What do you mean by that? Take a very large problem globally and shrink it down.
So our current system that we use, and you know, I'll fast forward a bit because now I'm the senior vice president for the company, but we ingest about 10 billion events a day of procured commercial telemetry data. Mm-hmm. All the stuff that's for sale on something that you use, either web-based, location-based, those become attributes. So a location's an attribute, a website you visit's an attribute. You can make those complex behaviors so that now that we can take a look at, where is Wagner Group working on the continent of Africa? And within seconds, we can isolate some of those locations very accurately. Mm. And in the days of old, when we used to do this, signals intelligence kind of collection and targeting when I was in service, you had to get a lot of high side capability to do that. It was behind the curtain, and you had to have certain approvals, and it was limited resource. This is open for everybody, and we keep it at an unclassified level because I don't violate any of your personal information. I don't see the phone number that you're using. I don't see the text messages that you're using. And what was different about that is you can take the chip out of your phone, you put a new one in, you're going to start doing the same things again. Mm-hmm. And right, so there's an algorithm that can be run to determine proximity of other devices with each other. So now I know the co-travelers, co-workers, bed down locations, work locations, and we can go back in time a year. So when you think about it really in aspects of force protection, enhancing how you apply ISR collection, again, taking a large thing, think swaths of Africa, shrinking it down to a finite locational area, then commanders know where to put those assets or put humans on the ground. We're using this now in the last year. Our company's been able to procure U.S. and EU data through the approval with a legal process. So now within the United States Army, we're doing threat vulnerability assessments for units that better prepare them for what their digital footprint, their digital hygiene is before. What are the indicators and warnings of them as they prepare to go off to do real world operations? And so, once when I was backing it up a little bit, when I was consulting with them, a private equity firm came in, bought CrowdPulse, two other companies that had commercial dealings for the same type of analytical work, and then they transitioned the name to Torchlight. And I was given an offer to come on full time. I was given an offer by the CEO, who, by the way, is a guy named Jim Borey. When I was a company commander in 2nd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group, 3230, he was one of my detachment commanders. And shortly after that, he did a staff stint and one hit out at HRC and decided he didn't want to stay in the Army and got his MBA and then worked in these commercial holding companies in different locations. So he became a very smart businessman, and when he knew I was consulting, knew he wanted to grow a defense portion of the company. And what my background was, he thought, okay, Brad should come in and consult with us.
Yeah.
Once we got that rolling, hey, would you entertain the idea of coming on full time with Torchlight? And this is a year after I retired. I promised myself I'd take at least a year working as a consultant, keep my consulting LLC going. And it is today too for other reasons, but I said, okay, yeah, I'll take you up on that. But let's go back through the Honor Foundation. Now, this is me personally. I went back through them, and they had the ability, and this is lifetime for me or anybody that goes through the Honor Foundation, compensation negotiation, right? It's very hard for servicemen and women to determine their worth when they come out.
Yeah.
You get a paycheck. I know every promotion, what that paycheck difference is. I know every year I'm going to get another 2.1% raise or what it is. I know what my jump pay is if I'm on status, demo pay, dive pay, those kind of things. You don't have that level of understanding because it wasn't really a concern. I didn't join the service because I wanted to become rich off of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that'd be foolish for anybody to think they were going to do that if all they got to do is, Google what the pay scale is for kids coming into service. But, they said, hey, if this is a private equity backed company, ask for a few different variants of compensation. Get a salary and ask for equity in the company. They'll give you a lower salary or points on sales. Mm-hmm. And they give me all three. Low in comparison what it could be over time. But certainly more than I was making as an 06. And so I thought, okay, I'll come on and do this. I came in doing it, helping them with business development, specifically in the special operations side of use with our tool and trying to acquire clients that way. We grew very quickly in the first year of me doing that. And to back it up, when Jim, the CEO, went to the private equity firm to say, hey, we want to bring Brad in full time, they said no, he doesn't have an MBA. And he can't work on the tech side because he doesn't know how to type in ones and zeros to make this algorithm work. And one of the original members of the Crowd Pulse team that came out of the Northern Virginia unit said, hey, we don't have anybody here that can do what he does, right? So I can understand, the object of what we're trying to do as a company. I understand the clients that they want us to go after.
Yep. And
I can connect that tissue. So they took a chance on me, and about a year into it, we brought in a very large book of business, and then they gave me an offer to stay on as the senior vice president for mission success, which is all the current operations. And that's where I am today.
Oh yeah.
Literally today, we're working on closing a deal with SOCOM that I think is going to help transition. And part of the criteria for me coming into Torchlight, and at the time Crowd Pulse, was if I was in my old organization, would I use this? And absolutely. And it didn't exist on an unclass level because it's shareable with partner forces. And by and large, what I did with special forces, whether it's, FID or COIN or unconventional warfare, by, with, and through partner surrogates and allies, you got to have the ability to unclass share things. This tool really could do that. The journey to get to that realization, though, I don't think I would have had if I hadn't spent the time that I did and the growing pains that I came through service with, right?
Sure.
And I probably have a similar story to a lot of the people coming out of service, and specifically with special operators. You live a lot of your life hearing the word no, and trying to find mitigating ways around that without doing anything unethical, illegal, or immoral. And I found a passion in what I did in the Army. I mean, I came in the Army wanting to be a Green Beret, and it wasn't until towards the end of my time at the Virginia Military Institute I realized, I was kind of duped by a mentor of mine, Command Sergeant Major Billy Goodson, who both commissioned me and retired me, and he lives just north of here, about 50 miles. I didn't realize until I was towards the end of my time and contracting to come into the Army, you couldn't just go right into Special Forces, right? So I had to do something else first. He said, hey, don't go do infantry. Go do something else that you bring a skill set to a Special Forces ODA. And that's what I did. But throughout my career, and we can transition back to the beginning whenever you want, I was told no a lot. Mm-hmm.
Let's make that transition now. So, first of all, I love if that stuff really works. That's really cool.
I'll bring my computer. It's in the truck. I'll show you. We'll put a polygon in your house. I don't know how much you want to see. You want your wife to see what you're looking at in your computer, but
I don't give a shit. Yeah, that's cool. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me where you come from and who you come from, and by that I mean who are the people. What location as far as like region in the United States or state that you come from. And then I want to know birth order if you're not an only child.
Okay.
Yep. Let's start there.
Is there going to be like
questions that come off that? Possibly.
You're going to say, okay, because you're a middle child, I can tell it?
Nope.
Okay. All right.
That's just for me. Research for me.
Born in Norristown, Pennsylvania. It's right outside of Philadelphia. And then my dad worked for 41 years for Merck Pharmaceuticals. And so when I was about 7, we moved to the Jersey Shore. So born in Philly, raised in the Jersey Shore, preordained to be an asshole. And I speak really fast, so slow me down if I get going too much, and I use my hand, I'm going to knock your shit over.
No, you're good. But if you can't this way, because your mic stand is like covering your whole face up.
Nobody wants to see me anyhow.
Okay, if you're good though.
That's
however you want to say it, I don't care, but you're good right there if you can do it there.
So, grew up on the Jersey Shore in a little area called Red Bank, New Jersey. Most familiar if people are looking for it. It's exit 109 off the Turnpike. Or I'm sorry, the Garden State Parkway. So people normally ask if you're from Jersey, what exit? It's exit 109. Pretty average childhood. I was not a go-getter in school, and again, I think part of that was because you couldn't give me the money to pay attention to stuff like that. I got an older sister. She's 18 months older than me, and a sister that's 4 years younger than me. Older sister lives in Arizona now. My younger sister lives up in Buffalo. My family are all from Western New York State. My mom's side, farmers, dairy farmers, small dairy farm. My dad's side started his grandfather started a cheese company in a town called Cuba, New York. So it's still there. Sold when I was about 11. My grandfather died, and they sold that company. But it was a very close-knit farming community. So the cheese company took all the milk from the local dairy farmers, and that was that kind of the production. And during the that town was built on the heels of the Great Depression, and then World War II. All of the goods and materials that were from that area went into the war effort, and so it was pennies on the dollars, but everybody was bought into the war efforts for World War II. But then on the backside of it, that's where things like that cheese company did pretty well, right? They made a name for themselves, selling cheese to the government for the war effort, and all the crops that were taken from or procured from the farmers in the area. But it's small America. I mean, it's pretty rural. My granddad used to tell me when I was going to school in the South, in the Virginia Military Institute, he'd say, what's it like? Because he never traveled. He was a farmer. I said, Pops, there's a lot of rednecks down there. And he'd say, you know what the difference between a redneck and a hillbilly is? Geography. Right? So he's like, people are people, wherever you go. And he truly was. My mom's dad, Clark Lucky, was really a mentor to me. I spent most of my summers growing up because both my parents worked. My dad was working for Merck Pharmaceuticals. My mom built clothing patterns for a living, and then was in real estate for a while, and had a lot of different jobs to make ends meet for three kids that were growing up in New Jersey. On a relatively low budget. My dad was a quality control plant manager in Rahway, New Jersey. So if you fly into Newark, New Jersey, that horrible smell, that's the refineries in Rahway. He made a decision to commute, either train or commute every day, and then we lived down the Garden State Parkway, away from that, in a waspy little neighborhood, and it's very eclectic in the Northeast. All the neighborhoods have different things, right? There's a black neighborhood, there's the Asian neighborhood, there's the Jewish neighborhood, and then there's the mutt neighborhood, and that's kind of where I grew up. But it's pretty normal, and when my parents moved from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, they had the option to start me in school early. Later on, we found out that was a mistake, because I didn't really do much in my initial high school. I went to a regional high school, Red Bank Regional High School. Basically didn't get a grade for the first year, and was thrown out of that, and had to sit in front of the guidance counselor with my parents. And this guy tells my dad, hey, this kid's going to have to get like a general education somewhere and do manual labor and always have to work for somebody. Looking back on that, it's not probably something you tell a 12 turning 13-year-old kid. No. And that I was freshman, 12 turning 13. So it wasn't going back to that school. And
this was because what? Just education level?
I didn't do anything in school. I played sports, and I fucked off a lot. I wasn't belligerent to my parents. I didn't really have any guidance or direction. And, purposeful guidance and direction. And it wasn't by the fault of my parents. They were trying to raise three kids and provide a living. And so I didn't go without. I mean, we weren't rich, we weren't poor. We were just kind of, living. But then I went to a naval military high school called Admiral Farragut Academy, and there's one in Pine Beach, New Jersey, and one in St. Petersburg, Florida. The New Jersey one folded some years ago, and they put all that resource into the St. Pete's one. And I lived there. So it was literally like Lord of the Flies in a high school environment, right? And so you're in this naval military. I wanted to be a SEAL. That's all I wanted to do.
Is that why you went there? You can, like, you told your parents that's what you wanted to do? And
I want to go in the Navy. Maybe I watched a few movies or something. I don't really know. But one of the commandant of the school was a retired NSW guy. And I remember, because I got in trouble a lot, and you'd have to go see the commandant, and he'd sit you down and say, okay, well, let's ask ourselves, why are we here, right? Why are you here today? Well, because I fucked up. I did something else. I told somebody to pound sand, kick rocks, whatever. And he's like, okay. And behind him, he had pictures of I don't remember what team he was in, but he was on a SEAL team that went and recovered astronauts out of the ocean. Like for a 13, 14-year-old kid, that's pretty cool, right?
That's cool.
But he was the only one that wasn't really like digging in my ass to be, because I just didn't have any focus. He kind of drove that focus. And I had another professor, a guy named Kurt Iverson, all 4 years of high school there. And he was a naval officer, and at that time he was in the reserves, surface warfare officer, so nothing super impressive, but he went to the Virginia Military Institute. And he was absolutely a mentor in terms of focusing young Brad Moses on, hey, pay attention to what you're doing now, it's important later. So I had the option. I ran, we didn't have a track team, and they lost their insurance. Some kid broke his neck doing a pole vault, but in my family you had to play sports all 3 seasons. If you didn't like it, you don't have to do it again next year, but you can't quit. That kind of thing. So, the regional high school, I played football, and that put me in probably a bad crowd. My parents said, "Well, you're not going to do that again." So, I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to do anything." And I could run, so my dad contacted the coach and said, "Hey, this kid can run." So I joined the cross country team, not by choice. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was 6th in the state of New Jersey. So that opened up some doors for me to get at least accepted in the colleges.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to go down the military path. I had a Ranger contract drawn up. I just changed my mind somewhere. I don't think some of my friends were going to enlist in the Army, and a Ranger contract seemed enticing. And the recruiters came around us. It wasn't an option 40 back then, but same thing. Mm-hmm. And my dad was like, hey, you can go to school now. Your mom and I have saved to assist with paying for school, and the Army will be there after that. So if you want to enlist after you go to school, fine, but you may want to continue your education now while you're used to going to school. And so I applied to the Citadel and Norwich and Virginia Military Institute, and I had full scholarship offer to Brown, and I was like, man, I'm not going to go to some Ivy League school, right? It's just a dumb kid, right? But I went to the Virginia Military Institute for an interview, and I remember going to the accessions office, and they're like, absolutely no. I'm thinking, man, my grades were pretty good. SATs sucked, but I was not terrible, but I was in the band of the swing space of I should get accepted here. I'm not sure what's going on, and then
right.
the head of the track and field team came into the office and says, hey, let me talk to this young man. So it was a dupe, right? They wanted me to go there. They wanted me to run. And I did. So, I went to the Virginia Military Institute, and I thought, man, I'm still going to go in the Navy. And all the athletes have to go there the summer beforehand. And there was a new ROTC instructor, and he was an E9 coming out of Devens and then Colorado. He's a Green Beret, 10th group guy, Billy Goodson. And he recruited all the athletes to be part of the Army ROTC program, right? And I was like, okay, man. And he's like, hey, there's divers in the Army. Well, you don't know, like, what's the % chance of me going special forces and being a combat diver? It's a whole lot less than me saying I want to go in the Navy and be a SEAL, right? I'm not saying it's any easier or harder. I'm just saying the % chance, because there's only one dive team per battalion in special forces in the active duty groups, right? So it's a pretty small number.
Pretty slim.
But it happened, right?
Yeah.
Again, so you start with no and work your way forward from there. So I did okay. I tell people I failed into the Virginia Military Institute because I think I had a 1.8 in my first year. So none of my credits would have transferred anywhere else. So I obviously kept going there and worked my way out of that hole. I got my Bachelor of Arts, marched penalty tours until about 30 minutes before I graduated for use of pyrotechnics and starting a riot in barracks. So not the best student in the military environment.
Sound like you were really, really fun to hang out with, though.
Yeah. It's only now that I'm allowed to tell some of those stories to my adult children. But, I took a commission in the Army, and I listened to what Sergeant Major Goodson had said and chased going into the field artillery. And his point was, hey, go be a forward observer. As a field artillery officer, you're going to get sheep dipped in all of it, whether it's fire control, gun line, or being an FO. But go into an organization where you're going to be a forward observer and attached to the infantry. And I said, okay, well, I get out to Fort Sill and absolutely failed, like complete recycle on an 8-month course. And I'm 6 months into it, fail my gunnery exam twice, and they're like, hey, restart. But just back this up a bit. I went to a military high school, lived there. I went to a military college, not a lot of freedoms. Now I'm a second lieutenant in the Army, and I just had to be at the right place, right time, right uniform. The rest of the time was mine. So somebody lit that Roman candle, and I was a little bit wild coming into service. And didn't pay attention to the things that were important. I was so mortified when I failed that, twice and had to get recycled all the way back to the beginning. And at that time, it was I came in November '95, and it was post Gulf War swell. The Army swelled, and then it was Clinton era. They were reducing the number, so most of the officers came in on a reserve commission. So that you could drop, and they offered me, hey, you could go, and you don't owe any commitment, because I was not on an ROTC scholarship, so I didn't have that commitment. But I thought, no, this is what I want to do. I really want to be a Green Beret. I'm going to do these first things first to make me a better Army officer, to become a better Green Beret. And I never lost vision of that, and I was super embarrassed that I'd failed at that. And after that, that's the only thing that I ever failed in a school or my career. Every other school, I was, top 10%, honor grad, those kind of things. It's just, you made motivation's a powerful tool. But I was given my first unit of assignment. It was 377 artillery out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, because I wanted to go to Fort Bragg. I want to be a paratrooper. I'm like, 377 artillery. It's an air assault heavy howitzer unit. I'm like, I am not going to Fort Bragg and not be a paratrooper. There's no fucking way. And they're like, well, that's cute, Lieutenant. You didn't really get a choice.
Orders, not asks.
Yeah, that's right. And it says like, hey, you can find somebody to trade with you. Well, everybody else that's going to the 82nd paratrooper, they're like, pound sand, Moses. I'm not doing that. And I said, well, I wasn't airborne qualified as a cadet. I went to Northern Warfare School up at Fort Greely, Alaska, which was a phenomenal course to be a part of, because I didn't want to go be a cadet at airborne school and walk around with the orange garbage bag picking up everybody else's cigarette butts. So I did get orders to go airborne en route. So, okay, that's a plus. And then they allowed you to do this Ranger Challenge program, because not everybody can go to Ranger school coming straight out of your basic course. And they whittled it down, and they eventually got 6 slots, and I got one of them, and I went straight through Ranger school. So I left.
That helps, huh?
Yeah. And at the time, my younger sister was going to UNCW, so I left Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, drove up to Wilmington. All my uniforms smelled like ammonia. I was down 31 pounds. I looked like a fucking skeleton. And I drove to Fort Bragg and knocked on the door of the Division Artillery headquarters and said, hey, I'm Second Lieutenant Moses. I just graduated. I've been calling you guys in between my phases. And there was some HR guy. He's a major. And he's like, who are you? I said, I'm Brad Moses. I want to be a paratrooper. I don't want to go to 377 Artillery. He literally picked up the phone and called the division headquarters and said, or they called down to the other regiment and said, we'll give you the next guy that walks in the door on orders. We're keeping this one. And he said, well, how much leave do you have? Well, I get 10 days of leave. I mean, I wasn't in service all that long, so I got about 10 days of leave. He goes, all right, go get cleaned up. You're assigned a 2nd of the 319th Artillery with duty at 1st 325 Airborne Infantry Regiment. So, okay. So I'm all psyched, leaving. I still have like my Rangers tab pinned on my shirt from my graduation, right? I look like a wreck. It looked like a little kid wearing a grown-up's uniform. And I said, yeah, I got a question. Like, where's the unit? Right?
Yeah.
Anything. And so I show up to the unit, and they're like, oh no, there's no one here. I got a staff duty. The doors are locked. And back then, this was pre-war, so everybody's in the field all the time, and no money. Yeah. So it was, walk around the woods to bum campfires as objectives, and they were doing their live fire qualification, and this is like the old trench days. You're clearing trench lines. And they're like, oh, your unit's out there. I show up to my unit, and they're like, oh, yeah, you got to register the howitzers and the mortars. I'm like, okay, I've done this in in like simulation or at the OP at school, but now we're doing it right before a live fire.
Yeah.
So the battalion commander and every one of the company commanders had come from the Ranger Regiment. And Dan Allen was my battalion commander. Eventually, I think he retired as the Force Com deputy and 1st Armored Division commander, but at the time he was lieutenant colonel, and he only had Ranger Regiment officers, right? You got it in the Ranger Regiment, to be a platoon leader, you have to be a successful platoon leader somewhere else first. Guys go back as company commanders. They had to do their, regular Army company commander time. Same with battalion commander. So they all were going to go back to the regiment in the same position, but back to the Ranger battalions they came from. And I was one of 3 Ranger qualified forward observer officers in the artillery unit. So I got recruited pretty quickly for the 75th. Called them up, and they're like, "Hey, you're still a 2nd lieutenant. You got to wait till you're a 1st lieutenant to apply." So I did that, and I turned in my.
Can you just for the audience, because I'm sure that a lot of them don't understand the difference. Can you help explain the difference between a Ranger and then a Ranger with the 75th Ranger Regiment?
Yeah, I just blasted some nerd on TikTok about this.
A lot of people don't know the difference.
A lot of people go to Ranger school, and it is a MOS qualifying designator. So if you are airborne qualified and Ranger qualified, at the end of your career designation in the Army, it's an MOS, you'll get a Victor identifier. So you are now I was a 13 Alpha Victor, so meaning paratrooper and Ranger qualified.
The Victor is Ranger qualified
and paratrooper. If it's just a Sierra, that means, hey, I'm Ranger qualified, but not a parachutist.
Check.
So I'd gone to airborne school, gone to Ranger school, got a Victor identifier. So now I qualified as an officer to try out for the Ranger Regiment. 75th Ranger Regiment, headquarters out of Fort Benning, Georgia. Now it's Fort Moore, and they've got 3 subordinate battalions. 1st Battalion is in Savannah. 3rd Battalion is co-located at Fort Benning with the headquarters, and then 2nd Ranger Battalion is out at Fort Lewis, Washington, Joint Base Lewis McChord now. And so you have to go through a separate selection process for that, a Ranger assessment selection. Whether you're officer or enlisted, the enlisted guys that come straight in, it's an 8-week process. The officers is a little bit different, but you still have to qualify through the Ranger assessment selection and a board. And so when I applied for that...
And that's to get into 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yes.
Okay, so you can go through Ranger school and get your Ranger tab, and that just makes you...
Ranger
qualified. But to be... So here's where I think confusion comes. Are you still a Ranger if you're not assigned at Ranger at the regiment?
Depends on who you ask. You ask a guy that served...
I'm asking you.
Well, then, no.
Okay.
Only Rangers guys associated or with that have served in the 75th Ranger Regiment. You're going to have a lot of people blast on this and say, "No, I'm Ranger qualified." Man, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
I mean, it's a small unit tactics and leadership school. It was phenomenal. I think it's a great opportunity. It is a very high attrition rate for the course. It's a 72-day course. At least it was when I went there. I'm not sure what it is now. With 3 phases.
It's not to throw shade on the course. I just wanted to understand the difference. Well, I understand the difference, but it was late in my career that I understood the difference. I never knew.
Yeah, 75th Ranger Regiment. Young Joes that go straight into the Ranger Regiment still have to go through the Ranger assessment selection process, even if they don't have a Ranger tab. But you can't stay there unless you get your Ranger tab and your Ranger qualification from Ranger school.
Gotcha.
So officers, though, different. You can't even apply unless you're already Ranger qualified.
Check.
And have served in the position you're asking for. You have to have already successfully served in it in another unit.
Check. Okay.
So
I'm better now.
All right. And again, you get a lot of hate mail on this, but it's okay. They can get over it.
I don't read it.
So I applied to go to the 75th, and I get a call from the regimental fire support officer saying, "Hey, we got your packet, but your request for a transition of a unit is not in there." And so it's called a 4187. It's a request for reassignment. And
like you forgot to put it in, or
no, I didn't. I didn't forget to put it in. So the units they can either recommend approval or disapproval. They can't stop that process. But the 82nd Airborne knew that because the 75th Ranger Regiment is both, there's times they're tier 1, times, and majority of the formation's tier 2. They knew that they could blue chip and pull guys in if they needed to make their numbers to increase to 110% authorization strength. And so I was, again, one of 3 lieutenants in Division Artillery that was Ranger qualified. I didn't realize at the time they had pulled my 4187 from the packet, but obviously it made sense. So I resubmitted that, and the division artillery commander, who I'd literally never met, writes across in big, like a red Sharpie, disapproved, and says, "You can fucking send that, you disloyal bastard." I'm like, I'm staying in the Army. I'm just going to go to a different unit. And then they changed my duty position. So they took me out of the infantry unit, put me in a fire direction cell with the cannons that I'd never seen. And I'm like, this is not, they're doing this on purpose.
Like as retribution?
Like to stop me from going to Ranger assessment selection. So the battery commander,
nice,
a guy named Mark Neese, had been an enlisted Ranger Regiment guy, and then went to West Point, and then, now he's a captain in the field artillery. He's the battery commander. And he goes, "Hey, you put in a RAS packet?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "How much leave do you have?" So no shit, man. I go to fucking Ranger assessment selection while I'm on leave. That's right? Awesome. Probably not the right answer, but that's what happened. I came back and I got approved to go to 2nd Ranger Battalion, because you got to get sponsored by one of the battalions as an officer, and then they'll send you to RASP. I was sponsored by both 1st and 2nd Bat. And when I was done with the board, like, which one do you want to go to? I was like, well, I've never been to the West Coast, so let's go to 2nd Ranger Battalion. And the guy who was my company commander in the infantry, a guy named Adam Rock, was going to go. He had been a lieutenant there, and he was going to go back as company commander. So I'd have the same company commander twice, right? The 82nd and the Ranger.
Well, I mean, if you're on good terms.
Oh, yeah. We got along great.
Yeah.
So I literally come back, and I'm running down Ardennes Road. This is, it's the road they closed during PT formations in the morning, PT in the morning. And the battery commander finds me, and he's flagging me down. He's like, "Get in the truck." I'm like, what are we doing? He goes, "Yeah, we're going to see the Divardi commander." I'm like, shit. So we go in there, man, this guy flame starts me, just absolutely flame starts me. And I'm still, like, I'm a 1st lieutenant now, but I'm still pretty ignorant. And I said, "Yeah, permission to speak freely." That doesn't actually mean you can say what you want. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm tired of hearing you tell me I'm disloyal." I probably said it differently, but that's how it came across to him. And then the sergeant major just fucking, I thought he was going to kick me through the field goals of life. He's like, "How dare you talk to this 06 that way?" I'm like, "I'm staying in the Army." And he's like, "You'll never come back to Fort Bragg again, you MFer." And blah, blah. I had just won division, the best fist competition before that, and everybody getting all his praise.
That's why he's mad. And he's losing his shiny little toy.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but so anyhow, I go back to the unit, and then they pulled me out of my job. Like, I don't even have a job. Like, how do you do this in the Army? Like, I have nothing. And so the battery commander is like, "Hey, man, I know you don't have any leave. You may want to advance some of that leave and PCS early, because if you're here more than 90 days, I have to rate you, and they're just going to tube you." Mm-hmm. So I make my way across the country, get to Fort Lewis, Washington, sign into Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion, and I served as the weapons platoon leader, which was the FIST team. So the forward observers, the Gustav section, which is the anti-tank guys, the snipers and mortars. So it was awesome.
That's the whole package right there.
And so, which was great because, and I was the only artillery guy that was serving as the weapons platoon leader. But the reality is it made sense, because once you go to the field, the FIST teams go to the platoons, the mortars, they're in the fire support by fire positions, and Gustavs are segregated to the platoons as well, and then the snipes are doing their thing. So you break apart when you go to the field anyhow, and I'd be trolling with the company commander as his FO, and I went to Naval Gunfire Spotter course out there, which was awesome. I got JTAC qualified, which later in life that helped me out
a lot. I'm sure.
Yeah, it did, especially going into OEF1. I was my own JTAC. I had a Jaguar call sign and everything. It was awesome. But I still wanted to be a Green Beret. And guys are senior in position in the Ranger Regiment, and I didn't want to leave. Stan McChrystal was our regimental commander. And his deal was, hey, for you officers that think you want to go to the special mission unit or to special forces selection and assessment, you can't do it during your time you're serving as a platoon leader. You got to wait till the end. So that was already putting me behind my peers in the Army. So I'm like, all right, I still want to do it, but if I don't make it through assessment and selection or the qualification course, I'm now a year plus behind all my peers in the Army. And I'm going to get like Korea or some recruiting station, some bullshit. So motivation, again, is a powerful tool. And while I was there, I got orders to go to the Artillery Officer Advanced course because I'm a captain at this time.
So you're 03 going to this school, and you're trying to get...
No, I didn't go to the school. That's the story. I threw away my orders.
Okay.
Didn't tell anybody. And so I get called to that battalion commander. His name was Mike Okita. And he goes, hey, I got the regimental commander, this is Stan McChrystal, on speakerphone, and he's getting called by Army Human Resources Command. They're wondering where you are. You're AWOL. I'm like, I'm not AWOL. I was in PT this morning. You saw me. He goes, so Stan McChrystal's on the line. He says, hey, Brad, did you get orders to go to the artillery officer course, advanced officers course? I'm like, yes, sir. But I told you my plan. I'm going to go. I have a selection packet in. I'm going to go to selection after, this summer when my time's done. He goes, you just can't fucking throw away orders, brother. So he cleaned that mess up for me. And I went to.
Oh, you ended up having to go or no?
No, no. I went to Special Forces Assessment Selection. Passed.
What'd you do to? Did you know Stanley McChrystal before that?
No.
So how's that work out? He was like just understood that that's what you wanted to do, and he's like, fuck it.
Yeah, he took care of Rangers. He's just.
That's what he did.
Yeah. And
okay, cool.
So I mean, he squared me away. I met him a few times when I was going through Ranger Assessment Selection. He had back surgery, so he was not the board president. It was the deputy commanding officer of the regiment that did my board. But he came out during EIB. We were doing best fist competition, so he came out and did a PT test with my weapons platoon. And this dude could run. Now, so could Brad. And so he comes out there. He's doing the push-ups and sit-ups, right? He's in a station line. Then he comes over. I knew who he was, but it's like 4:30 in the morning, right? My guys are kind of pointing at the collar and the hat. I'm like, what are they doing? He's like, hey, I'm Stan McChrystal. Nice to meet you. I don't think I know who you are. I'm like, oh, Brad Moses. I'm the weapons PL, right? And so
good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, sir. But he laughed it off. He goes, hey, what kind of time are you going to run in this 2-mile, Moses? And I'm like, I think I'll break 9 minutes. And he's like, no fucking way. I'm like, okay. So he beat everybody in my weapons platoon except for me.
Oh, he could really run.
He could run. Yeah, and I was probably somewhere right, just over 9 minutes, right? But then I was a steeplechase runner in college. It's 3,000 meters with hurdles. So that's about the distance I could do. Much more than 2 miles or 3 miles.
Yeah.
I get my car keys out. Unless it's a ruck march. And then we were down in Hunter Liggett, and no, it wasn't Hunter Liggett. It was Fort Knox had opened up a maneuver training center, and we had done an in-flight rig. The regimental headquarters came out to do their, they were great. It was a graded eval. So we did the in-flight rig. We jump in, we hit this target, and he made this deal like, hey, if anybody can steal the chicken off the objective, you win a prize. Well, it was a cement chicken on the top of this
oh Jesus,
water fountain in the middle of the urban terrain training center. I put that motherfucker.
How big?
I mean, it was like 3 feet tall. It should be like one of these cement yard ornaments you'd see at one of these local places out here. So I put that shit in my rucksack and came off the objective with it. And so that obviously got some attention.
And all this stuff is before he goes to bat for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
so he's like, okay.
Makes a little more sense.
This kid's a hooligan, and he's got his head switched on. And they did say, hey, we want you to come back to the Ranger Regiment, go back to the Army, serve as an artillery officer, come back and be the regimental fires officer. Progress your way up. We want you here. But I said, I got my heart set on doing this, and he honored that. And he had been part of the special mission unit, as well as all the way up through the ranks in the Ranger Regiment. So he did respect that. I went to assessment selection, 21-day select, good to go.
That's like a hard select, right? Is that the first one?
Yeah, it's Special Forces Assessment Selections, 21 days.
Oh, okay.
A lot of individual events. They don't tell you anything.
Yeah,
Take all your instructions off the whiteboard kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I'm pretty sure MARSOC got its whole thing from y'all anyway.
Correct. And
most of it.
We'll get there. I'm a plank holder from MARSOC.
Oh, cool. Oh, sorry.
They won't admit that. They give me a really small paddle. You don't have one here. They give me a really small paddle, so I think I have to roll harder than everybody else that's associated with MARSOC. But
so interesting is it started out as really small paddles.
Yeah, right.
Like they got bigger as they started to bedazzle them for awards and such. But Carlson's Raiders, or it was after that, but they always just, paddles were not like a big thing to them. They'd throw them down. But it was a symbol of what they did. And then at some point, I was just doing research on this because I don't have a paddle. I'm not part of that community, so it's like I wouldn't have one. But when I started interviewing guys that were from that community, they started bringing up the paddles, and I started seeing them. I'm like, okay, I wonder where this started. But it's interesting because they've gotten bigger and not smaller.
Yeah.
So smaller might be more in line with what it started out as.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Fun fact, right?
Fun fact.
So I make it through selection. Officers have to go to the infantry officer advanced course or armor advanced course or the engineer one, those three. I went down to Fort Benning for the captain's career course, come back to go through the full special forces qualification course. It depends on your MOS.
Now, can you get dropped in the Q course?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so you go through, you get selected, and then you go to Q course.
That's
and
right.
you can still
fail.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. The attrition rate isn't terrible once you make it into the qualification course. Some are medics, pretty tough because they got to be full-blown paramedics plus gynecology plus dental plus. I'm telling they do all this, right? But for the medics, it's like a 2-year process.
Oh wow.
Everybody else, it's somewhere a year to 18 months because that depends on what language you get assessed at. Mm-hmm. And so,
is that regional?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take one of the harder languages, Mandarin, something like that, it's a 6-month course. I took French; it's a 4-month course. So, and this is where you learn your job to be in a Green Beret, and then everybody culminates at the end for the Robin Sage unconventional warfare exercise. That's all over North Carolina. And I had a blast. Honestly, I had great instructors. Small unit tactics wasn't. I showed up out there. But for my MOS phase, for the 18 Alpha phase, I had a great instructor, a guy named John Nutt, and then the master sergeant that ran our Robin Sage committee came out of 5th group. Phenomenal job. But I had this guy, Teeters, Sergeant First Class Teeters. I'll never forget him. There was a time when they would take the 18 Charlies, the engineers, and the 18 Delta medics, and they'd put them in the civil affairs community because they needed those two MOSs to enhance what the civil affair teams were doing regionally around the world, right? Pre-war. And so he was bitter that he had to go serve in a civil affairs unit, and then now he's doing his instructor time at the Special Warfare Center in school. So we show up there for small unit tactics. And again, I'd been in a light infantry unit, paratrooper, 75th Ranger, premier light infantry unit. And now everybody has to baseline because some of these guys are 88 mites, they're truck drivers, whatever.
Yeah.
All walks of life within the Army, everybody gets a baseline of instruction. So I get pulled aside and get handed a 3x5 card every morning. Here's these 5 things you're going to train your squad on today. Employment of squad automatic weapon system. You're going to do this land nav class. You're going to do support by fire and placement, right? Battle drills, X, Y, and Z. I'm like, all right. I thought this was a thing, right? Then I'm looking around. I'm like, we're the only fucking squad that doesn't have an instructor. Mm-hmm. And so I just started showing up to the cadre huddles every morning. As a student, like with the number, they're like, who the fuck is this guy? I'm not wearing a black hat because I'm not an instructor. And so I get pulled aside and they're like, who the fuck are you? I'm like, well, I forget my squad. I was like 914 or something. I forget the number. That's been a minute. But they're like, where is Sergeant Teeters? I'm like, I don't know. But this motherfucker was at the house. Like he'd come in the morning, hand me, and I'm like, if this is the level of professionalism that I'm going to be exposed with in special forces, then I don't want anything to do with it. I'll go back to the Ranger Regiment and regular Army and do my thing. And so this new master sergeant shows up and he becomes our instructor.
How'd that go over for that?
Oh, they shit canned him.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. They shit canned. Well, they made him shadow the master sergeant that showed up. But that guy that took over as my small unit tactics instructor when I was a battalion XO and 2nd Battalion 3rd Group, he was the battalion CSM, J.C. Crenshaw. Extremely professional fucking Green Beret. And so that literally changed my position on I'm fucking quitting this bullshit non-professional versus okay, this guy is a fucking professional NCO, J.C. Crenshaw. Shout out, phenomenal guy.
Shout out.
And so, they get the MOS phase, great instructors. I finished the Q course and language school, and SEER is the last thing, survival, escape, resistance, evasion. Right before I go to SEER school is 9/11. Mm-hmm. Right, and we're at the schoolhouse, and they bring us in, big screen, movie screen kind of thing, and they're showing CNN or Fox was, I don't think around, but yeah, they had the news on, and we're like, oh shit, right? And my wife is a nurse. I've got a young son, Hunter. I think he's probably 18 months at this point. Sorry, Stacy, if I forget how old our kid was at the time. And she's a nurse working with other nurses that are guys that are going through the Q course with me. And they're like, oh my gosh, thank God the boys are in the Q course because the war will be over. Everybody's perception was it was going to be like Desert Storm, right? It was just going to end right away. Nobody realized it was going to be that life-changing at the time, right? No. And so everybody, even you, obviously you're younger than me, you know exactly where you were when all this broke loose. And I'm getting ready to go to SEER school, and I'm like, you gotta be shitting me, right? I already knew I was going to go to 2nd Battalion 3rd Group. I got recruited into that. I was one of the only guys in my Q course class that wanted to go to 3rd Group, and their area of responsibility at the time was Africa. And I'm like, that's got to be the dark continent, the last of the Wild West. Everybody else wanted to go to 10th Group, go to Europe, pointy shoes and tight pants. Or 5th Group had a pretty good, they were in the Central Command area, they had pretty good rotations. And then, anybody that wanted to go to 7th Group, it was because you wanted to go there and hang out with the Latinos. Sorry, guys. And 1st Group.
Do they get a choice, though, where you go?
You do.
You do?
You get an order of merit list, and, you got to rank order all 5 active groups. The National Guard guys, they're sponsored by them, 19th or 20th Group guys, so they know they're going right back there. I put 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And the guy that worked for Human Resources Command as the Special Forces assessor was friends with a guy who just took over 2nd Battalion 3rd Group. And a guy named Ed Reeder, had been all-time 7th Group, redirected off the alternate list to pick up 2nd Battalion 3rd Group because the guy that was coming in to take battalion command got a DUI when he was PCS, right? So life's about choices. And so he contacted the Alpha Committee company commander and said, send all the Ranger Regiment guys over here. I want to interview them. Because he knew he wanted to have a mix of guys that were regiment, now Green Berets. Mm-hmm. And he was chartered with starting up the Crisis Response Force, B-23, in that battalion. Every other group had their own CRIF. 3rd Group didn't. He got chartered with starting it, and then the war broke out. And I was going over there for in-progress reports every Wednesday afternoon. I'd cut out of language school. So I knew I was going to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Group. Didn't know what the war was going to do now, other than it was going to make a mess of things. So I'm in SEER school. It's like build your hatchet day or something, campfire. I don't fucking. We were making some tools, and I get pulled aside and said, "Hey, your unit got its alert order, and they're going to blow out." And I said, "So I get to leave?" And they're like, "No." Oh, because the final phase of SEER is the resistance training lab. Yeah. Right. We get the shit kicked out in the POW camp. And I'm like, so I'm sitting in the POW camp, the resistance training lab. On the speakers, they got the babies crying and boots. And I'm like, okay, so I got to get to Afghanistan. I don't really know what's going on. I have no idea where my unit is. So I graduated the Q course, and 8 days later, signed in the unit. And they're like, hey, you got to find this other ordnance officer, a guy named Michael Spike, who, no shit, I went to college with. And they're like, you guys got to make your way to Afghanistan. I'm like, okay. It's just like the Q course. Choose your own adventure.
Here we go.
And so we got a one-way rental to Atlanta, got an AMC flight to Germany. And they gave me this warrant officer. He's like the motor pool guy. I said, go link up with this warrant officer. and he'll get you on a rotator into Afghanistan. So I find this guy, and he's like, "Who the fuck are you?" I said, "I'm Captain Moses, man. I gotta go. Look at me. I got
You're used to it at this point, eh?
Yeah, it's like
who the fuck are you?
Yeah. I think my entire career was like a controlled fall. I'd like to think I stuck the landing, but so we show up and he's like, "All right, hey man, I got a deal for you." I'm like, "A deal? Like the unit is expecting me and our ordnance officer." And he's like, "You got to sign for the contents of that C-17, and then you can fly in with it." And it was 8 or 9 Toyota Tacomas that they had bought from like downtown Fayetteville to put on these birds because we didn't have enough ground mobility vehicles, and 2 pallets of Javelin rockets. And I'm like, "No, man, I don't think this is a good idea."
Yeah, that's a couple millis.
I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Well, I don't," because I didn't want to have to like sit and secure the aircraft. But I didn't know what crows were. So the Air Force has these security people that guard the planes, and especially now with the wars going on, we're at Ramstein. There's no way anybody's
different.
Yeah, right. So I'm like, okay, so I get this like janitor's ring of keys for these TRDs, and I got a clipboard with serial numbers on Javelins. I'm like, it's all palletized. And there's no way I'm cracking the pallet. I'm like, all right, man, all right, I'll do it. So we're running around Ramstein for like 2 days, get on the bird. It's literally us and the crew. And there's some other cargo in it. I don't know what the other shit was, but I know there was 2 pallets of Javelins and I think 8 or 9 TRDs. We corkscrew in. And this is April, right? So
Of
2002.
Of 02, yep.
So you think about September 9/11, there were certain units that went in October, predominance of 5th Group, December timeframe. I'm there in April, right? This is the beginning of the war, right? 5th Group had done moving, from Mazar-e Sharif down the, Panjshir area. And then I call it the east coast of Afghanistan. Everybody's on the run. So now 3rd Group comes in and they're going to splinter out and work with some of the 3-letter organizations to build camps and build surrogate forces and just straight up guerrilla warfare. And I'm like, man, I am no shit one of the luckiest guys in the Army. I get to do exactly what I was trained to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we corkscrew in, we land, and I'm used to being in the Ranger Regiment where they have the Ranger Special Operations Vehicles. Back then they were Land Rovers, quarter tank of gas, flap, hit the straps, and you're going to race off the tailgate. Well, I do this, and I almost smoke these supply dudes that are out there. And I'm like, turn this thing sideways. There's the signs like mines don't go here, all the Russian planes that they're pushing out. And, there's this chain thing spinning off the front end loader. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? Hot as shit. And they're like, what? And so literally this E4 comes up to me, this young black kid, and he's like, "Are you Cap Moses?" I'm like, finally, somebody knows who the fuck I am. Like you're like some 03 special, right? And he goes, "Yeah, the battalion commander's waiting on you." And this is Ed Reeder, who's our battalion commander. So I'm like, "All right, man, here's the supply list. You got it, man. But I'm keeping this vehicle." And it's like a gold TRD. Stickers are still on it from downtown Fayetteville. So, I don't have shit for equipment because they took it all, right? I didn't even have a gun. No rifle.
You got a kit?
No sidearm. No body armor. I had 2 pairs of new desert camo. They had just bought all the Mitch helmets. So I had one of those. No cover on it. It's fucking green. And aviator kit bag and the rucksack that I had during the Q course and in the Ranger Regiment before that. This thing's tore up like from the floor up. And so,
I love it.
Because they're like, "Don't worry, you'll get it all there." So I show up. And Lieutenant Colonel Reeder's like, all the soft was in one area in Kandahar at the same time. So you got Can soft, German soft, North soft, and everybody's just stealing from each other because nobody has enough equipment.
Yeah.
So I pull in there, go into the ops end, and I don't know any of these people. I know who the battalion commander is because I was doing the IPRs with him. I recognized a couple of staff people because I'd seen them in the staff briefs, but I don't know anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get in there, and the battalion commander's like, "Come on to my office." He's like, "All right, hey, man, what's the deal?" He's like, "Where's your stuff?" I'm like, "I don't have anything." And he's like, "What?" He's like, "You don't have a rifle?" "No, I don't got nothing. I don't have anything." And so he's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to be a combat diver." And he laughed at me out loud because that was a specialty team. That's a second team, right, at the time. And he goes, "Hey, man, I'm not switching out detachment commanders in combat. And you're a JTAC. That's what you're going to do." I'm like, "Sir, my certs are way out of date. I've been in 18 months of Q course and officer training before that. Like he goes, I don't know, we'll worry about it. And they had a JTAC instructor qualified NCO working as the, fires planning dude, some E7 Air Force guy, straight-laced JTAC, and he takes me out to Tarenac Farms, and that's the old videos, like the monkey bar terrorist fucking site. We just drop bombs on it. He goes, "You're good to go. Let me see your logbook." I'm like, "I don't have a logbook." He goes, "I don't worry about it. You're good." He goes, "You're gonna be."
Just confirm that you knew what you were doing and called it good.
He's like, "You're Jaguar 09." I'm like, "What does that mean?" "Don't worry about it. That means the aircraft will listen to you when you talk to them." So okay.
Is that always a tag that you get if
you're a qualified JTAC? Yeah, in special operations, a Jaguar call sign.
That's interesting.
They weren't later on when we professionalized ourselves a little bit more in the war effort. Because again, nobody, there was no pre-mission training. The war started, everybody went.
Yep.
And so people were still in this weird mindset, like, training base, right? Non-war kind of training base where everything's rules appropriate, policies and doctrine, and that all that shit's out the window, man. This is the Wild West. And so he's like, you're gonna be the JTAC with the Coalition Coordination Center. So they would link me up with like the Norwegians that were going to go out, and I'd do their JTAC, or the CANSOF guys, which is helpful, being that my wife's a maritimer in Canada. I got along with those cats pretty well. Couldn't understand most of what the Newfies said, but I got along with them all right. So I'm out there dropping bombs with these guys, and I'm just like, this doesn't feel right. But I did get a gun. So a senior captain.
Glad about that.
Yeah, so there's a senior captain, a guy named Hunter Crandall, was working on the jock floor, and the battalion commander walks in and says, "Hey, Hunter, you don't need that. You're going to be sitting here pushing paper. Give Brad your rifle." Didn't make friends that day.
No, I'm sure that took a minute.
But I was part of the fires planning for a large operation called Operation Full Throttle. And everything that we did in 2nd Battalion, 3rd Group was referenced to Harley Davidson's. Our boss is a big motorcycle guy, and that's even the logo. But Full Throttle they got the name. There's like a motorcycle magazine called Full Throttle. And somebody had that sitting there like, what are we going to name this operation? I think the CW5 is like, how about Full Throttle? And so this was going after Mullah Omar and Berater, big Taliban. Fast forward in 2019-20 when I'm working for Scott Miller at Resolute Support Headquarters, that's when they were doing the negotiations with Berater. And I remember General Miller's like, "Hey, Brad, we want you to work on this negotiation strategy." I'm like, "Hey, sir, you and I both tried to kill him. I tried for 8 months up in Urzgan."
Bias here.
I don't think the lawyers are going to say that's a good idea. But so there was one of the special mission units was going to go in there and try and kill those two guys. And there was a SEAL element that was going in on ground, and then a bunch of the SF teams were going to go and with their gun trucks to have a base of fire with some heavy guns that would support what the ground operation was going on, and some of the ODAs were going to stay. And that was the push out, from the 5th Group thing. Now we're going to go out to these key areas, push out.
Yeah.
This was like the original oil stain. There's only, at the time, there was like 20 ODAs in the entire country. So that's not a big footprint. It can be if you get a large guerrilla force. But I'm doing the fires planning for the infill of this operation, and they're now collecting some of the other ODAs to bring them back to Kandahar that are going to do the ground infiltration. And ODA 365 was one of them, from Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Group. And there was a MC-130 that went to pick these guys up, the company headquarters in that ODA dive team, and it crashed at takeoff. And it was Chariot 5.5, so that crashed, killed the medic, Pete Tice, team sergeant. The plane melted, burned his face, team leader broke his neck. This team was going to do the ground infill. I knew, because I was going to ride the AC-130 and I'd done all the fires planning, battalion commander, and I'm like the junior captain in the battalion. There's still some guys waiting to take teams that are on the staff. But I knew the ground plan based on what my position was. He turns around and I'm the only one that said I want to be a combat diver. He's like, he goes, "You're taking over that team and you're going to infill them."
Hello.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Now, if I might, what went wrong on their takeoff? And how far off the ground were they when they crashed?
Not very far, and it was a weight calculation. So when you pull on, the plane's going to know what it weighs. It knows how much it can take based on its fuel capacity. the barometric pressure, all the meteorological data that, you know, deviates. I'm not an aviator, but
For lift, it
all
makes
that,
sense.
all that shit matters. And the trucks went in heavy, and the calculations on the aircraft was off. And when it took off, it just nosedived back in.
It lost the lift.
Yeah. So a couple of crew members killed. The team medic was killed. And so now I'm taking over this team, right? And all the equipment's destroyed, gone. And so the team commander...
And you just did the planning for this mission.
Because they were coming back to reconstitute to go on Operation Full Throttle as,
Right.
as a ground element.
No, I'm saying, but you did the planning for the mission
That we're about to do.
that you're about to do, and it's like, all right, you're taking that team, and here we go.
Yep, you're gonna go on the ground element for this infill, and I'm like, okay. So they get back. Pete Tice gets flown home. We have a few days to he was in Tonawanda, New York, so they some of the team goes back with him, and the team sergeant and a guy named Mitch Lane, the engineer who serves, you know, the Charlies serve as logisticians on the team. They hand me a hand receipt of all the team equipment. They're like, well, you got to get as much of this as you can before we get back because we're going on that mission. And the team sergeant, a guy named Chad Anderson, looks at me and he's got burned, his face is burned, and he's like, hey, the boss says you're the new team commander. I don't want you. He goes, the last guy was a Ranger Regiment guy, and I didn't like him, and I saved his life. But I really don't want you as a team leader. That's the introduction to my team sergeant.
How
Future
you
team sergeant.
doing?
And so he literally comes out in the promotion list, moves up to the company headquarters. This is all in like a matter of days. And they move a senior 18 Fox intelligence sergeant who's on the promotion list to E8 over to my team, and he becomes the team sergeant. And I went around and stole everything I could to reconstitute, at least so we had 4 mobility platforms, medium and heavy weapon systems. And it worked out. We did the ground infill, and we were one of the stay behind teams. So it was our
Oh,
detachment.
it must have went well.
Well, we didn't kill Berater and Omar, but it was fine. We occupied a compound. We had 2 agency representatives there that had a CCM bag full of money, and they did a reactivation plan to one of their assets from the early '80s. We moved up into Kajran, and that's up in Dakundi province, north of Uruzgan, up in the mountains. We linked up with the Indige and started to build a guerrilla force. So 8 months of that trip, we had about 300 guerrilla fighters that we were roaming around like a band of misfits, and it was a good time to be a young
Are these
detachment
former
leader.
like Mujahideen
Some were
sympathizers? I would say
some were, like my interpreter that I got. 100% was
like
a
under
dude.
Ahmad Shah. Those guys.
They weren't directly connected, but they were part of. I didn't have any Northern Alliance guys, but they were all part of that element that was.
Pan-shear resistance element. Yeah.
So, the warlord that I linked up with was John Muhammad Khan. He had one eye, and he was running drugs. Right, it was opium or hash, and he was directly connected with Dostum up in the north, which was made famous in the 12 Strong movie. I met the guy. He was wearing all white when I met him, which was weird because I'm like, how does he keep it clean? I remember thinking that, other than like, is he going to cut my head off and stuff me in a Conex container and bury me? But those guys, they were, I mean, that was, as long as we weren't messing with their movement of narco trafficking, they didn't like the Taliban either, because that was just interrupting their way of life. So it was weird, right? It's you can't do anything immoral, unethical, or illegal, but you get parameters. Okay, what is the mission I'm trying to accomplish with my unconventional warfare force, and what's the agency doing, and how are we working together? But this was straight Green Beret work. We weren't doing any, capture kill type stuff. That there was other units that did
building
that.
a force.
Yeah, we were building a guerrilla force for the area that we were at, and it was awesome. And it was tough though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are if I might stop you just right there, what are some of obviously this is gonna be lessons learned in your experience only, but what are some of the roadblocks or issues that you run into building Indige guerrilla force, and what are some of maybe the more interesting or lighter sides of doing it? I would imagine language is going to be a starter,
Sure.
but
right, I just come out of the French course, so that was useless. But we did, we were able to get local national interpreters that had a rudimentary working use of the English language, so you could go through that. We did not have the cultural awareness. And so you make some mistakes pretty quick, right? Don't touch the kids on the head. Little nuanced things that whether you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, little things that you didn't know going into this, right? And so you make some friends, you don't make some friends pretty quickly. What I did learn though is the cultural nuances go both ways, right? So there was they were very unaccepting of us not knowing certain cultural acumen. But, I don't remember reading in my Ranger handbook that, patrol-based activities include man-on-man sex, right? So you're like, hey, no fucking on patrol, guys, right? So things that I just wasn't, as a kid out of Jersey, I wasn't ready for, right?
I think that we should, like, obviously we didn't know a lot about their culture and maybe fuck us for not knowing.
Yeah. Well, it was...
We know now.
There was no pre-mission training for me. This is OEF 1.
No, I know. I'm just saying us as a people, as an army, as a Marine Corps, right?
Sure.
So like we know that. But like the things that rocked me the most about all of this was not killing people. It was culture. It was seeing the way they treated mentally disabled children. It was seeing the way they had whipping Thai boys or, little...
Yeah, or abusive treatment of women, right? That's
not
something, right? I am, my
and
grandmother was the matriarch in that farm family, and she definitely was in charge. So when now I'm in this other culture, I'm like, okay, this
weird.
is not, I got 2 sisters and a mom. My dad traveled a lot with work, so I wasn't used to seeing that level of subjugation of women or abuse. But what I did learn...
Or what about human value on human life? Their value on human life is just nowhere near what our value on human life is.
I'd say and I certainly saw that later on when I was in 14 different countries in Africa, right? Their value on life is substantially different even than the Muslim culture.
Sure.
But what I did realize is it's how they define things. Virtues are the same. It doesn't matter, right? It transcends time since Plato. There's trust, temperance, courage, compassion, wisdom, hope, and justice. And I'll leave this with you. I learned over the years how I define those things, but you got to be a little culturally accepting because those things, trust, temperance, courage, compassion, wisdom, hope, and justice, a just life, their definition of that is different than yours and mine, right? So you just got to be able to see it both ways, and that's a maturity that took a lot of time for me being a Green Beret for a long time to realize, okay, empathy is important, not just internal to your formation, but with the people that you...
Sure.
And I love doing the whole by, with, and through partner surrogates and allies, right? I loved being a Green Beret. That was my thing. But you got to learn those pretty quick. What are the nuances and how do people define those different virtues that Plato wrote 2,400 years ago, right? That literally transcends cultures, time, and language. They're defined differently based on where you're at.
Yeah. I think as an analogy, something that a professor told me in college that kind of plays along this line, even in our own country. I know what an American flag means to me. I do. Watch my buddies' coffins get draped with them. I can hear the national anthem, see a flag ripple in the wind, and I can get overcome with emotion. I'm still that way. How does the inner city black youth that burns the flag in protest, do you think he sees that flag the same way I do? Question. No, probably not.
No, he's
right. So that symbol means something different to him.
Sure, and his virtues are defined differently based on where they're at. So,
and then you spread that over to Afghanistan. There's a whole lot more, and I bring that up because I had never heard it that way from me. And I'm like, why would somebody do that? It's like, well, that means something different to him than that means to you.
Sure.
Just like in their culture, there's way different meanings to different attributes. Let's say.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So there's nuanced things like that. I mean, we got in a situation in one of my early deployments where one of our OPs got rolled up and they took their heads off and it's like, okay, this isn't okay. Well, they were going to go and do the same thing to whoever they found. And I'm like, hey man, I just can't be a part of that. Like all the jets and all this gun and the cash is going away if you do that. You just can't. You have to try and convince them that culture goes both ways. If you want to be a part of the winning team here, your behavior has to be requisite to what is okay with ours as well. Not an easy thing for a young captain to try and convince in the side of a mountain, a guerrilla force that's way outnumbered. That, at the high end, I had 20 guys that were, Americans. But you learn pretty quick in those situations, right? And the reliance on your peers and the closeness that you find. I mean, think about your deployment time. It's hard in, the value structure or the commitment and belief in service today is a little bit different. It's not wrong, right? They want to go back to large scale combat operations. I think the drones that are dropping thermite on people might change the reason why we spend money on tanks, but I'm not in the Army anymore. That's people like Mike Weimer are going to have to make that decision as the CSA.
Sure, we got rid of them.
Yeah.
The writing on the wall.
But so I don't want to go too far down that well, but you learn pretty quick, and you get tight with a team, and that's a culture that lessons learned. You talk about lessons learned. That should be something that you don't lose on. How do you create the unit cohesiveness? Because you're not going to get living in a fire base for 8 months, eating rockets every night, going on patrol every day, and living with your indigenous force that creates that closeness and unit cohesion. But there's other ways to do that, right? It isn't just a formation run on Friday mornings.
No.
But it becomes a harder situation when, and I know that Johnny motherfucking Glenn was on here talking about the 60 headstones that line the third group sidewalk, and I know almost every one of them. It makes it a little harder when number 3 is a guy, Mitch Lane, who's your good friend. And he, as a young captain, he was the guy that would slow me down and say, hey, you got to have a focus of effort, right? Care for the wounded, honor the fallen, continue the mission, right? That's the priority. So that was the logo that when I took over third group, I blazoned on the wall. It's on everybody's T-shirt. I'm grateful that they still carry that over, because I know he talked about the rose ceremony that happened here recently and those traditions that, I didn't start that. I did create continue in the culture, but with that logo, the importance of, care for your wounded, honor your fallen, and continue your mission, right? You've got a process that you have to follow. But it's not easy, right?
Yeah, no. One of the hardest things I ever had to do was in 2010, and I have to inform my Marines that one of their best friends is dead, not coming back, not going to his funeral, and then I have to tell them that in 4 hours we're going back out, and we're going back out, and we're going back out, and like that becomes a thing, and that's part of the territory, let's say, but that's not easy to do. And
but what's option
if
B?
you're having to do it over and over and over and over throughout your career.
The right thing to do is get back on the horse, but you're
no, it's right.
You're creating a culture of individuals that are going to have that lasting. And I buried that for years, whether it was guilt or regret, but and it pops up. Here it was, Mitch died on the POD 28-29 August, right? That's just last week. But 2023, right? So 21 years ago, right before my son was born, and I notified his wife. That doesn't get any easier. I carried off George Banner 20 August 2013, right? As a battalion commander, I put my flag out of my rucksack on him and carried him off the battlefield. That doesn't get any easier, right? But you got to bury that and teach, or at least talk to these younger individuals, because it's going to happen again, right?
It's coming.
It's
like right now, it's coming.
Yeah. It's foolish and naive to think that servicemen and women are ever going to be out of harm's way, even in training, right? You got to train like you fight. It's tough, realistic training. You're going to lose people, and certainly the enemy gets a boat. But it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to share with others that shared suffering goes a long way. And in my community, for years, internally we talk about it. You toast a beer and you walk down that line of 60 plus headstones, and there's, bourbon bottles and coins and stuff like that. But when you walk out of service and you don't have that anymore, I can't go into a team room and confide in, or walk into a sergeant major's office who was a teammate of mine when I was a young captain and have those dialogues. You get the Ricky Bobby moment coming out of service pretty quick. Like, what do I do with my hands? What's my purpose, right? You have that
purpose.
You have that, and I've shared this with other people. I call it the deficit of hope. And I don't mean to make it very morbid, but you've got a purpose-driven life, especially when you're in a pretty tight and actively deployed special operations organization, you've got purpose and direction, and everybody needs purpose and direction. Now you're on your own and you're doing things, and I made that choice at the timing because of where my family was and how I defined those original 5 criteria that we talked about in this podcast. But man, it got lonely real quick. And it's a struggle for my wife too, and I give her a lot of credit. She stuck with me through all of this, right? She raised 2 boys on her own. I was gone. I got a total of 80 months deployed to combat time. Now I had the PMT, dive school, requals, you name it, courses and training, right? I missed a majority of my son's life. And my wife did a great job raising 2 kids that they're not drug addicts. They're successful in their own way. They're healthy.
What's even... So, like, you asked for this, and she knowingly joined to that. But the kids don't ask for it, right? No. They never have a chance. And so when you see good kids come through all of that, and she did good.
Yeah, there's... I
well, y'all together, collectively.
I was part of a National Geographic documentary that General Dunford had authorized. It's called Chain of Command. It was an 8-part series, and in episodes 6, 7, and 8, my unit was in it. And this was right, so they embedded with us when my organization was in Africa, specifically with Team Wellham, and those are the guys in Niger that were killed in October 2017. And some of that footage made it into the episode 8. Episode 8 starts with my wife lint brushing my Class A uniform before going to the memorial ceremony, and my 2 sons are in the office. Right, that's what they got exposed to. From the time that Hunter was born, I was in the Ranger Regiment, so he was part of this Special Forces journey all the way through, right? And so I'd like to think I showed him, how I define those 7 core values. Neither one of them chose to make a life of being an active duty component, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so what?
Exactly. But I'd like to think that I showed him what it was to be a good person. And have some compassion and empathy for humans and human suffering. And certainly, I give a lot of credit to my spouse for keeping Team Moses going for so many years. And we just in June, we hit our 25th anniversary, right? And a lot of people don't make that milestone.
Well, shout out. Congratulations.
But there were some tough days coming out of service, right? And she's not used to having Brad around all the time. Brad's not used to not having purpose and direction. And so, I talked about my journey and going through these consulting things, and we're living in this little, temp rental out in Sanford, North Carolina, and kids she's got one kid that's now semi-pro contract hockey living in New Hampshire, and the other son's going to ECU, and we're trying to build a house, and there was 0.0 transition for Stacy Moses when I left service. Not one thing. So her life ended. I don't mean in a literal sense, but her life, as we knew it, on a daily routine, changed. Now both kids are out of the house. Her husband's not out of the house. She doesn't have the other spouse resources. She was never a make cookie for Brad's career. Or, have a bake sale. She didn't do that shit. She had her own career, and she was very helpful with the Gold Stars. But now we're not. All of that's gone. And so it was tough for both of us, moving away from service. She's still got a close net of friends, and we had her birthday weekend, August 12th, the weekend just before the 12th, and all of her friends came down are spouses of service men that some are active, some are retired, and all of them are still married to their spouses. And I said, it's like-minded people, right? It didn't work for everybody, but it did for us. And I don't know I wish I could tell your listening audience what the magic sauce was, other than, empathy and compassion isn't just for dealing with partners, surrogates, and allies. It goes a long way with your kids and your spouse too. So, transitionally, going back, I did 2 deployments as a detachment commander, ripped right back in to run. Now there was an expansion in Afghanistan to not just Kandahar, but out in the east, building BCPs 1 through 11, border checkpoints 1 through 11. They're going to put ODAs out there with their partners, and what was the militia became the AMF, became the border police. I don't know. We just kept changing the name, but it was the same dudes.
Mm-hmm.
We were just paying them through a different mechanism, but it was the same mercs that we had started from the beginning, just moving them around the battle space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Was that customary, or was it just what you were doing at the time because that's what you had?
That's all we had.
Yeah.
Right. So the ODAs that were rotating on a recidivist basis, they knew who their old people were.
Yeah.
They'd call them up and, hey, I want the Hussars out of Orzgun. Bring them up to where I'm at now, and they were loyal little Hussars that would go kick the shit out of people for you. So, and we built that trust and confidence and loyalty with our partner force over periods of time. Even when it was rotational, after Iraq started, 3rd and 7th were doing the rotations in Afghanistan. 5th and 10th were doing the rotations in Iraq. So I know where it is on the map, but I've never been to Iraq. But I've been to all but one province in Afghanistan over a total of 70 months, and then a little more than a year in North Africa, commanding SOC Forward NWA. So,
let me ask you this: did in any of the time building these guerrillas and running this indige, campaign, true Green Beret campaign, did you ever have close calls? Did you ever have where you guys maybe fucked up, or maybe they just didn't conform to the way you wanted to do things? Like, how do you deal with that? Did you ever get bad intel or bad personnel come in that were counter to what you guys were trying to run?
I mean, you always got to have the spidey senses on when you're living with your indigenous force, and there's certainly, I like to think that I was lucky enough to not have an insider attack. I didn't with my element. When I was the Soda Feast commander in 13, we did have insider attacks that happened. Prior to that, when I was the J3 at the Siege of Soda, from our SOC guys out west had it happen.
Was it Nick Lavery was an inside guy, was he not?
Yeah, that's right before I came in as the Soda Feast commander. Yeah, he was in 1-3, and I commanded 3-3.
I had him on the show, and he talked about that. It just broke my heart because I know, as I've not worked with him to the extent that you guys were working with him, but we had to work with, especially Marja, we had to have Candex come down, and then you don't know these people, and they get put with you, and then you just got to trust that they're not going to. And we had issues. Like, we had pineapple grenade pins pulled and, over stupid shit. And so that's why I was asking you guys experience, a lot of that because
early on,
you're more with them.
I think the risk was lower because I was paying them.
Okay.
Right. So
they wanted to do what they had to do to get the cheese.
Every couple of weeks, you have your payday activities. They'd have to show up with the rifle. The serial number was their social security number. Validate that. Get a medical screening, which just meant we did some human collection on our own indige. And then they get paid, right? So they didn't want us to die, or else they'd stop getting paid, right? Later on, when it was more, the Afghan army, the conventional guys, they didn't have that same level of pay and relationship.
Yeah.
Even we probably grew the commando organizations over time too big, right? You can't mass produce special operations. We violated that truth because. Quite frankly, the commandos were the heavy hitters across the country, and that's what everybody wanted. So they weren't screened like they probably should have been. So certainly those are lessons learned people could take going forward. But the early day commandos, man, they were loyal because they were outcasts, right? Because you had Pashtuns and Hazars and every kind of tribe that were in commandos, but they were commandos first, right? And so. The loyalty with them was pretty good. Even when we transitioned to shave some of those off to the National Mission Unit guys or the Tier 1 Ranger element with the Katejas, those guys were extremely loyal. And it wasn't us that was paying them. But when we had the mercenary force, I think the risk was lower because we were paying them.
Yeah. Probably makes sense.
And when you look at other risks that we didn't have until end of my second rotation, IEDs weren't a thing. That wasn't something that was really used or prolific. But once it got going, it really got going. So you talk about the lessons learned there. That'll transcend even large scale combat operations. You're gonna have to deal with those same force protection mitigation measures.
Well, now they fucking fly.
Yeah,
I mean, different space, man.
Right.
It's a different space now.
But yeah, I mean, you always got to have your guard up, right? And that's a stressor. It's hard to turn that off, right?
Yeah.
And so you come home and you're like, man, am I worried about when it's garbage day? I still don't like it driving through my neighborhood there's, garbage bags and bins on the side of the road, I get a little nervous.
Is there trash on the road?
Yeah. Oh. Right. Or tires. You're like, okay, is that a culvert? Am I going to have to get out? So, I mean, I did my time, first 3 tours as a captain. I went to be an 18 Alpha instructor.
How long are those? How long is your tour?
It varied. First one, like 8 months. Then it was 6 months. And then, we were building the task force headquarters in Bagram. So I was there for 9 months on that one.
Okay.
But
they got smaller, right? For the teams or no?
Teams
or shorter.
Teams were 6 to 8 months.
6 to 8. Okay.
The strike elements, those guys rotate on a 4-month basis, pretty regularly. Yeah, Ranger Regiment guys back then they were transitional through Afghanistan about every 4 months.
Check. I think that's right. We always did long ones. We're doing 8, 9 months. Sometimes you get extended, and I think if you're really in combat,
it's hard to avoid the complacency. Or the burnout, right? Like
that's what I'm talking about. It's the burnout.
Yeah, if you're doing, because when I was living up in the mountains, it wasn't like we'd go out on patrol and then come back to a large base.
Yeah,
we went on a patrol. We came back to our fire base.
Yeah,
with our indids. So there's no there's no like, hey, I'm just gonna go. There's no salsa night out at fire base.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we did too, and that's what I'm saying. There's a burnout session. At some point, you stop giving a fuck. Maybe not everybody, but I watched it in my Marines. Like at some point, they just didn't give a fuck anymore.
Yeah,
like, how much longer? Don't care. And like, I just wonder if you had the logistical capability. And see, that's the other thing. Straight leg infantry is not supposed to be that. You're supposed to go there and fucking hammer them, and then another thing is supposed to take over. It's just not the way we ran that campaign for 22 years.
I saw it when I was I left to be an instructor at the Q course. They wanted to bring in guys that had multiple rotations, so every group had representation within each of the MOSs, and this is in 2005. And the quadrennial review had been written. The SecDef directed that the Marines start a special operations capability. And I'm going to shorten it, and this isn't...
Talk about Rumsfeld making them in
it was
06.
Right?
Yeah.
So then it was... And the Marines like, well, that's cute, but we're already special. This is my version of the truth, right? Don't let the truth interrupt a good story. But by and large, this is true. At least my parts are. And then a bunch of us got pulled into the auditorium at Special Warfare Center in school. And on the stage, there was a panel of Marines, staff Marines, right? 06s, 05s, and majors off the side with the whiteboards and notes. And they're like, hey, we got to do it, right? We got to make this thing being directed, SecDef directed. If you guys are all been pulled in here because you got multiple combat rotations in, Afghanistan, and then probably at least one rotation in Iraq for those guys because it was 05, so it's still pretty early Iraq days. If you had to build your Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha again, knowing what you know now, what would it look like? All right, so I'm making the initial brief short, but we got put into these planning groups, and that's what the Raiders did. Now, what I will say is they got pushed into the fight too soon. So this is 2005
because they were forced, right?
Right. So
I think
what probably was majority force recon guys got pushed into Task Force Juggernaut in Jalalabad a little early, and I had gone from helping build that out, and then I had 2 captains in my class that were Marine captains that were coming through our 18 Alpha course that were going to go. They were going to go back to start MARSOC, right? And I don't even think it was called it then. Maybe it was.
Det 1.
Yeah, they didn't even have like a headquarters element. I couldn't tell you who the 06 was at the time, but it took until when I was the group commander, 3rd Group, Pete Huntley was the Raider 06 commander. He's the first stripper chicken wearing dude. And the guys that are watching this, they'll get what I mean. If you look at their badge.
I mean their badge wearing, yeah.
Yeah. So it took a while to get up to that, pure blood organization. And I think really what made a difference for them was once they gave them, in my world, an MOS designator, but a career designation, I think, right from the Marine Corps.
That's what it is for us.
Once they gave them Raider designations and a no shit pipeline that they had repeat cycles through, that made them a significantly more professional force. And I don't mean to take anything away from the original plank holders, but they did get pushed in, because I went to Command and General Staff College, came back to 3rd Group. I was the operations officer, went forward as the Deputy J3 at the Siege of SOTF. And my commander at the time, Chris Haas, was on his 2nd rotation as the 3rd Group commander. And he spent a lot of days in secure VTCs having to talk about what had happened with the Raiders, the initial Raiders, the previous deployment in JBAT, right? So, and I don't blame any of those guys. They were doing a reactive contact the way that recon guys would, right? It's a peel. It's just when you're doing it in a gun truck for 6 kilometers through a city or a built-up area, you don't have the same results as if you're, in a non-urban environment doing it. So, I have really, from that point on, I've never done a rotation in special operations where I didn't have MARSOC elements either working with me or for me. And more specifically, like when I had SOC Forward NWA as the 3rd Group commander, the Levant guys, that was all, Pete Huntley's guys. I just kept them on a rotation so they could PMT and train and do the area familiarization and the cultural FAM for Tunisia and Libya and those areas.
Now, how did that go? Explain that one to me.
Which one?
Well, some of your Africa work.
So, yeah.
That might have been different than what you were talking about.
No, it is. But just a little bit of, so 3rd Group was doing constant rotations to Afghanistan. And so when I was a major, we still had the Central Asian states. So
okay.
Anything that ends in a stand, 3rd Group was rotating ODAs through. And they were not doing any of the Africa work. That was all coming out of 110 Europe-based 10th Group guys. And so it's just, life's a struggle for limited resources, time, money, and people. And you only have so many ODAs you can put against problem sets around the world. So Africa got short-shirted. But
check.
Towards the waning end of the constant large-scale soft rotations, so even in 13, it was big. I had 5 B teams and 35 ODAs under 1 battalion, which is normally 3 companies and 18 ODAs. And we had from Mazar-e Sharif all the way down to Ghazni. So that's pretty big scale for an 05 command element. And working under Jim McConville, who was the battle space owner for RC East with 101st. We had a great relationship with them. I leave, I do some work at USOC headquarters, I went to the Army War College and was designated to command 3rd Special Forces Group, right? So captain through colonel in the same organization. And they were transitioning out of the constant rotations in Afghanistan, right? There'd be some element that would do that, but it would be underneath NSOC Alpha, those kind of elements, right? So the group headquarters was no longer going to, the guy that I replaced out of 3rd Group, that was the last of the Siege of SOTF 06 rotations in Afghanistan. And my boss, the USOC Commanding General, Ken Tovo, pulls me in and says, hey, you got to get to a 1 to 3 deployment to dwell rotation, because the group was like at 1 to 0.5 over the years, right? You talk about that burnout rate, man. That is not good for friends and family. And he goes, you got to tell me how long it's going to take to get to that. And so, it was a great negotiation. Well, do I have to do 6-month rotations to these JSETs or 127 Echo operations, which is lethal, approved for lethal by, with, and through lead operations, train, advise, assist, and accompany. In some of the areas in Africa, we had that authorization. And he said, no, you figure it out. I said, okay, I can do it in a year. But then we had to, off-cycle battalions, which was hugely helpful, because every one of my battalion commanders I had grown up in 3rd Group with, right? They were just below me as young captains, or I was a major and they were a captain. Now they're 05s and I'm the 06. There was no sniffing each other. We all knew who we were. And, 1 battalion, 1st battalion always misses Christmas. 2nd battalion for years had always missed summer vacation. And I'm like, hey, we've got the opportunity to make this whatever we want it to be.
Right.
Because I'm the force provider and resource manager for SOC Forward NWA on rotation to be there, and 3rd Group, right? So we can control that. Jamie Sands was the NSW commander that provided our force that we had under SOC Forward NWA, and Pete Huntley with the Marines. And so I talked to those guys and said, how do you want to do this? Well, we want to keep the same location so we can train on that, right? Keep the same partnered force. So the Cameroon guys were always the NSW with their Cobra Strike element.
Mm-hmm.
So that was their gig, man. We're not going to green you out. And I learned that from these guys. The Marines and the Navy say the Army's going to green them out, right? We're going to take the good missions.
Mm-hmm.
But it made more sense. Like, hey, from Marsac, Maine, you guys know what your rotational schedule is. If you want to make it a 4-month one or a 6-month one to offset your units to recalibrate,
Yeah.
I'm all for it. We just have to meet the requirement, the operational requirement. And I didn't get any pushback from, I can see his face. The Marsac CG was the Asian guy at the time. Anyhow, him and Ken Tobo had that agreement, like, hey, let these 06s run the rotational basis for the requirements that they have in these 14 countries in Africa, and we're fine. And I had a hostage exchange with NSW because they ran SOC Forward East Africa. I gave them some ODAs. They gave me their SEAL platoons to use. We had to do boat operations in Lake Chad Basin, so I'd get SWIT guys to come in there.
Where's that?
Right at the corner of Niger, Nigeria, and Cameroon.
Okay.
There's a pocket area there that's all swamp, and we had some SWIT guys, boat dudes come in, and we did a foreign military sales procurement of these no shit boats that we had built in Louisiana, duck boats with machine guns on. And so we had the SWIC operators attached, go in there and train these guys how to do it, bring the ODAs.
Oh, training.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Well, our Indians were running operations with them, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hell yeah. Even using WhatsApp on like a Nigerian pilot in this crop duster on his phone, taking a picture of your screen for an ISR shot and sending it up to him with an ink.
Hit here.
Yeah, like, hey, right here, man. These are bad guys, right? But you learned a lot of those lessons. What I did realize, this is where the benefit of having the battalion commanders that had the operational experience in combat in Afghanistan and myself, we had team sergeants, and the master sergeant is the backbone of special operations, and certainly within special forces, that's the operation, the team sergeant, right? A lot of those guys had come into special forces when it was matured enough in Afghanistan and Iraq that you push to talk SAT 102, you got to resupply within an hour, you got to medevac within 30 minutes to an hour, and you got CAS whenever you needed it.
Mm-hmm.
You go into Africa, if you didn't bring it, you're not getting it.
A little different show.
And so, man, the transition for these young guys on ODAs, and to me, it was Green Beret paradise to work with your partnered forces, whether it was a JSET or a 127 Echo program or any of that stuff. This is truly what Green Beret should be doing. Low cost, high yield. Out of the 14 countries, we only had one ambassador that didn't like what we were doing. And she didn't like anybody. But every other country, we had great opportunities with them. And they loved it. They didn't want a large conventional force footprint.
Sure.
And I would get asked by the AFRICOM commanding general, a guy named Waldhauser.
Yeah.
I'd have to do the back brief to him or his staff going in, and they'd want to, hey, talk to the ambassador, see if we can get the SP MAGTAF to do a rotation on continent. And the ambassador's like, hey, listen, we don't necessarily really want you guys here, but we like what you do, and nobody knows about it. So what I don't want is, a battalion out of the 10th Mountain Division. I'm making that up, right?
1,000 of you.
Right. We just don't want a bunch of 19-year-olds running around in northern Cameroon.
Making bad decisions, yeah. And that's one thing that comes with the infantry or the regular units or people that are not at your guys' level, not training like you guys, is that you got a bunch of young kids. And you guys might have young kids, but the maturity level of your young kids is not the same as the maturity level of my young kids. And so when I get a 22-year-old kid out there, he might be a corporal, sergeant, he might not be thinking about the devastating impacts he could have by doing one thing wrong.
Right, but you don't go through all the, think about even the unconventional warfare training out at Robin Sage and the cultural awareness and training and pre-mission training and all this stuff that special operations does. And it doesn't make him...
Oh, you trained better for it.
Well, it's just different. We train different. I don't necessarily it's better because there is an infantry unit within the United States Marine Corps is very purpose built for a reason. And don't get me wrong, when we were running operations with elements in Libya and even with our partner force in Tunisia on the border of Algeria, I made damn sure that SP MAGTF was like a floating police station, because if I needed somebody to come and help out a small unit of action, I needed it to be that.
Yeah.
Because you knew what you're getting, right? I need the flying monkeys from the Wizard of Oz to come in here and unfuck a problem that an ODA's in, right? That's because that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So I don't.
No,
want
so
to
not better. Different's a better
different.
word for it. You're trained for a different mission set than we are, and you're good at your mission set, and we're good at ours. But when you try to take what we're trained for and make it do your mission set, things fail.
Well, and I saw that
And it's
later
usually
on.
up here.
Yeah, in Afghanistan, you'd see conventional units want to replicate the village stability operations that were predominantly founded on a pilot program from 2009 that at the time the theater commander Dave McKiernan directed be done in Wardak province. And he was trying to connect what was called the ASOP Shura, so the Afghan Social Outreach Program, which was connecting it's governance 101, right? Grievance of a population to the local district, to the province, to the capital, right? And how does that voice transfer? Well, that was working. But then they were getting their heads cracked by the Taliban in Haqqani in the Wardak Logar region. And so General McKiernan said, I want to develop a security apparatus around that. And he loved special forces, specifically Army. And he was good friends with the SOC CENT commander at the time, a fellow named Charlie Cleveland, who eventually became my boss as the USOC commanding general. So he called him up and said, hey, I got this 06 on my staff. He says, this is what you guys do for a living. You build local security around this problem set. And he's like, yep, it's got to be an AOB because that comes with its 6 teams and blah, blah, blah. And in 2009, I was running the commando schoolhouse and my teams were running the strike forces, and I got pulled to do that mission as a pilot team. So once again, I'm like, man, I'm doing exactly what I signed up as a Green Beret to do. And I was living in the mountains of Wardak, and I think I sent you a picture of me shaking his hand or whatever.
Yeah, we'll throw it up. I'll throw it up on the screen.
And so it went extremely well. There was no con-op. This was a handshake with General McKiernan to make this work. I did an infill in February of 2009 to 8,300 feet in Wardak. It was snow, living in the governor's compound. Me and my warrant officer, Jamie Kornowski, who's the best soldier that I've ever worked with, a civil affairs officer, and one of my interpreters that I'd had for multiple rotations before that. He was a Golden Gloves boxer out of Kabul. Tough dude. And so there was just the 4 of us, right? And he's like, hey, see, do an assessment. He flies in, General McKiernan flies in, meets with the governor. I tell him, yep, we can do it. He said, okay, if it works, a lot of people are going to take credit. If it doesn't work, you're going to get the credit for it. But he was honest, right? And I love this guy. Dave McKiernan is a hero to me because he gave a young major a chance to do something that their purpose built for, right? Because I think soft, and people, you'll get a lot of trash talk, white soft, black soft, but it makes a point. Like the white soft guys are very good at what they do for unconventional warfare, and all problems in life can be solved with unconventional warfare. Somebody's going to write in and say, well, you're doing counterinsurgency. Well, you have to be able, there's pockets of areas that doesn't have government stability, so you're actually trying to overthrow the local Taliban government, right? So it goes both ways in my mind. You got to understand both. But that process, once it worked, so that was 2009. The 2 1-stars at RC East were Millie and McConville. Right? People will recognize their names. I came, and I was working with those guys when I was the Deputy J3. I come back as an AOB commander, and in between that time is when a fire base was overrun. Conventional platoon was basically decimated. And so now all they know is there's 4 dudes living on the side of a mountain outside a governor's compound in Wardak province. They weren't okay with that. Like, you guys are going to get overrun, and here's what's going to work. It's never going to work. They said no. And General Townsend was the commanding general at the time. No, Schlosser. Sorry, he was a 101st Division commander. And so Schlosser was 2-star. Was told by the 4-star, no, you're going to support this guy. Because if I didn't have support of the conventional dudes, they owned the lift, they owned, they had the cannons regionally that I could, I still needed to have good partnerships with the conventional brothers. But then when I came back as the J3 in 2011, that program changed names because it was Afghan Public Protection Program. It changed to be Village Stability Operations, and it was in 93 locations. So it worked, right? Building local security apparatus around the voice of the local population, it worked. When I saw post, because that was 11-12, I was there for years at J3. When I came back as a battalion commander in 13, and I saw these combat outposts where there's a platoon, an infantry platoon, trying to run village stability operations that they were not trained to do, living by, with, and through. And they were stretched to capacity to just man the three corners in their triangle outpost. I mean, I drove up to one place, and there was rocket fins, RPG fins, stuck in their CP, right? And you're like, man, these guys have no white space.
Yeah.
And then, that was one of many collapse. Okay, we're leaving Afghanistan. It happened in 11, happened in 13, 14. And then, I was there working for General Miller at RS headquarters in 1920, and we were writing the plan for the reduction of forces in Afghanistan. It didn't obviously go the way that the plan was written, but the administration changed right after I left that time. And, obviously people know the history of what happened after that. But a lot of those, lessons learned transcend into Africa. Some of them were at a deficit. We were very used to having rapid QRF type elements or armored vehicles, right? You can't drive around in the Sahara desert or in the Sahel of Africa in an MRAP.
Yeah.
And even if you could get them there, there's no way to get like a spare tire.
Yeah, your logistics is fucked.
Right. And so, the outcomes of all of what happened in 2017 when I had guys that were killed in Tongo, a lot of
How did that, can you kind of like build context around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we had an element going after a named objective north of where I had another ODA that was doing more localized partner force patrolling. And so this got investigated 5 times. It became, because the Trump administration, I'm not going to go too far into my opinion on politics, but members of the Senate Armed Service Committee wanted that event to become the Benghazi for the Trump administration. So no matter the results of any investigation, it wasn't good enough unless it created a stain on the current administration at the time.
Who would want that to happen?
A couple members of the Senate Armed Service Committee.
Is it just
One of which,
I'm guessing the other party or the same party?
No, other party. One of which is a Democrat from the state of New York. You guys can do that.
Yeah, and look, I don't overly try to intermix my politics with my podcast, but unfortunately, we've come to a point where everything is so fucked right now politically, and some of the things that we thought we could trust, we can't. Some of the things we knew we could trust, we can't, or have come out to have done some untrustworthy things, let's say. And so when people, because I'm not that guy either. I don't want to go in and sound like some partisan on some partisan trail trying to beat people. But at the same time, if we don't talk about this stuff, the stuff that's obvious and glaring and like downright repulsive, things like that to me are repulsive. Like, you're going to do this mission, and no matter what, it needs to be the outcome.
The enemy gets a vote, right? So shortly before that, and this is in the record of at least 2 of the 5 investigations. I had written this goes into my moral courage is probably one of the greater virtues of a leader in the military at any pay grade. And people wane from that. Mm-hmm. But I had written to the SOCAF commander at the time, subject line in the email was dangerous state of ambiguity. And we had gotten to a point where we were doing a vast number of different operations, JSETs, some were advise, assist, and accompany with lethal capability. But I didn't have the mitigation resources at the 06 level to reduce the risk to a threshold that I don't want to say comfortable with, because that wouldn't be true. But I wanted to make it obvious that just understand we've passed that threshold of where I can reduce risk to what you would consider an acceptable level. In terms of armed ISR, was denied in a lot of areas by AFRICOM, even though some of the ambassadors were asking for it. We didn't have the medevac capability. You really weren't going to get that, but just understand the risk. If we keep going down the road we're on, so I had this email up, here's the things that we're doing, here's the risk mitigation at my level, and the response back was RGR THX. Roger, thanks. A month later, Tongo happened. The enemy got a vote.
So what Congo?
Location on the northern border, northwest border of Niger, just below Mali.
I understand the location, but when you say that happened, what does that mean that happened?
So one element was going after a named objective. They got weathered out. Another element was on a patrol. Hey, stop what you're doing. And we had ISR that had shown where the named objective had moved out. And the ODA was asked to go in there and do some sensitive site exploitation for the camp that these guys have gone through. There's a litany of things that happened in between then that wasn't brought to my level, like communication from the ODA that, hey, they identified that their risk was pretty high based on the length of time they were at a patrol. Battalion commander never told me that. They had assets on their patrol that weren't on the count-up. Title 50 assets. Never told that. So there was a litany of things that happened that were mistakes, but it wouldn't have changed the outcome of them being attacked by an overwhelming force and servicemen losing their life, right? So it's horrible, and I'm not making light of it. Adding to the issue, because it became so political, the Secretary of Defense gag ordered everything. The General Waldhauser, the AFRICOM commander, directed that it only be investigated at the 06 and below level, because if there's an investigation done at the general officer level, it opens up the ability for a DOD-IG investigation, which now just unravels what the scope of the investigation can be on. And so...
No, so what happened? They got attacked by an overwhelming number, a superior force? While they were doing the SSE?
Afterwards. So they were coming back through the village of Tongo.
So they basically backlayed and waited on them?
Yep. Yeah, intercepted them. Unfortunately there's helmet cam video from one of my guys I'm sure it's still on the internet. You can see the whole attack. It was pretty horrific. And that caused a lot of political knee jerk, but so some of the operations that we were running had to be Center Armed Service Committee approved, and some of the members of that committee were the first to say, what are we doing over there and why are we doing this? Well, stop. You signed off on some of these missions. You can't have it both ways. But I knew
at that point, is it just like they're so out of sight, out of mind that like a Roger thinks on that? Like, who's that come from?
Marcus Hicks, the 2-star, that is a moral coward, a 100% moral coward. Never should have been in that position. Tony Thomas said so afterwards. Like, it was almost a farewell tour. He had been the chief of staff at SOCOM. The guy that was his predecessor at AFRICOM was a bit of a recluse, kind of a wild card, and so they put in this former AC-130 driver, last lap around the earth for time and service, and he was just there. Like, they don't turn in con-ops after Thursday. Why? Well, because my staff is gone most weekends. Like, who does that, right? Where you at? Come on, man. That's the hard part for somebody that's got all these licks and chops in combat environment. And then you're like, man, is this really who's in charge of me? So, I don't want to. So let me go forward. The Army was always good to me, all the way through these investigative processes, to include the chairman. Remember, I said I worked under Milley when he was a 1-star as a soft major. So he's now the chair. He was the chairman. He had my back on this. The chief of staff of the Army, McConville. Remember, he's a 1-star, and then I was a battalion commander. He's the division commander. Absolute moral courage in both of those men. And I got it. People have different opinion on, because of what President Trump thinks about General Milley. I like the guy. He was above board with me.
What year?
This is the incident took place in 17, but the investigations are like 18 and 19. But Milley, McConville, And the Secretary of the Army at the time, Ryan McCarthy, graduate of the Virginia Military Institute. He was a year behind me, so, but we ran on the track team together. He was very professional, had been in the Ranger Regiment. Those guys all went on my behalf during these investigations. I'd already been made the BG list. I'd gone to the course, was on a withhold for promotion because Senate Armed Service Committee for 06s and above has to have 100% yes vote. Now, doesn't mean anybody has to put no, but if they don't put yes, it counts as a no. So Gillibrand wouldn't sign yes because she wanted that whole event to be the Benghazi for the Trump administration.
That was her.
Oh yeah, her and Duckworth. So, you know, and people, you know, I had a lot of people tell me, hey, you didn't, because of the investigation results, hey, you didn't do anything wrong, but smearing the unit, didn't like that, and then withholding. You know, they redacted all of the investigation. They redacted the investigation findings so much and didn't release it to the families until like a year plus. That's not okay. So you can't take that back. And you can't tell the families, hey, you can't go to the press and say that DOD is not being supportive, and they're looking for a target, right? I didn't like being the target of that one, but, you know, I didn't control the narrative. The SecDef did. And Mattis and Waldhauser were super tight, so he wasn't going to let Waldhauser get rolled on that one politically. So, I mean, again, it is what it is. Once you get up to that level, you know, you're an E9 or an 06, you're now exposed to some
100%
political entities. You know, you certainly can take the lessons learned out of that, and there is good that came out of those investigation findings and results at least at the Army Special Operations Command level. To use that as a, you know, lesson learned on, hey, here's a vignette of things that preceded and happened, and how do you take those things and mitigate them down the road? What it doesn't do is alter the lack of moral courage.
Roger thanks doesn't mitigate shit.
No, RGRTHX. Yeah, that's 100% response I got, and that's for sure in at least two of the investigations. Because I made sure it got like.
See, that's
anybody see this?
See, at that level, I don't know that I would ever be able to operate, and like keep my job. Right? There was a lot of commanders that wrote in my reviews that I was a super smart guy, but needed to learn how to know when to talk. When it was my turn to talk, like I literally got that as a velvet dagger in fitness reports. But it's like at some point, somebody with sense has to say, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah,
because at that point, I think they got you by the short and curlies. You're 06, you want to retire, you got your things going on. And it's like, if you make, you know, any deviation from the norm or the baseline, you're blasting yourself because you're now in a community of politics.
Sure.
Or that's political.
Sure, but, you know, and I've had people tell me that. The reality is you do have to take into consideration the unit is more important than you. Right, and so, and especially since I had been born and bred, and I was the first pure-blood commander of 3rd Group, and like captain all the way through. What I wasn't going to let is my mouth tarnish the reputation of my organization. Right, so you know, I hear what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying bad on you. I'm saying for me, it's very interesting that we would even be put in the position to have to feel some sort of way politically when you are a warfighter, or to see that sort of, or that level of incompetence at that level of responsibility.
Yeah.
It just sucks that it's a thing, and it will always be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I had no DROG. I retired with full benefits and my medical stuff, and, you know, no issues. There was only very few people, though, at the senior leader level that were honest with me about projected outcomes. And I'm still tight with these guys now, but, you know, someone like Fran Beaudet from the beginning, and he was the commanding general at SF Command when I was the group commander, and then when I was the chief of staff for him at USAC, was very clear about, man, I'll give you a 50% shot on this. And he goes, it's just...
You mean whether they burn you or not?
Yeah, he's like, it's just political at this point. It's nothing that you did. And he goes, slings and arrows. They're going to throw slings and arrows at you. Man, you're in a political position now. That's... And he wasn't wrong, right?
I've heard that 06 is the start of that, and it just gets worse going up. In generally every service branch.
I had another 4-star mentor of mine that I've named in this, but not during this phrase because I don't know that he wants everybody to know it. So when I made this decision to, you know, when the Secretary of the Army calls me and says, hey, man, we're going to roll you to next year's list because we just can't get past this with the Senate Armed Service Committee, I said, man, I'm good. Like Captain Moses never thought he'd command third group and didn't think he never knew he'd be the chief of staff. I've been in USOC since 1997. It's 2020. I said, man, at 21, I'm going to retire. That's fine. And then the CSA calls me and says, no, I'm going to pull you on my staff. I'm not going to try and imitate the Boston accent, but Jim McConville calls me up and he's like, hey, I'll pull you on my staff. We'll just roll you. I've already been to the BG course. We'll roll you to next year's list. I'm good, man. My son's getting ready to retire or graduate high school. Captain Moses was going to be a team commander and then get out and go into like the DEA.
And you just kept doing it.
And then you get on this whirlwind of shit, and I loved what I did. And I was just like, nah, man. And equally as hard was because DOD couldn't tell the whole story, right? And some of it's certainly redacted with the controlled access to some of the information and who we were working with. The media just wrote whatever they wanted, right? And so my wife's at home having to read all this, and that's not. And she knows what happened. Like we can talk about classification codes and everything, but my wife knew what I did for a living, right? And she knew the events that unfolded.
Sure. She
met with all the families with me. So when she's seeing this, nobody told anybody anything. She's like, I was there. Like it got to the strain, and I'm like, what am I doing? Right? Like, I got no DROG. I'm an 06, 26 years. Like,
and I'm still subjugating my family to this.
Like, do I really want
to what?
Do I really want to get on this train? Like, no, I'm good. But and at the time I made the decision, one of my 4-star mentors came to me physically and said, hey, looking back on my career, if I could do anything different, I probably would have retired out of the unit. That's 06 command for a unit at Fort Bragg. And I'm like, are you serious? That was 10 years ago, sir. And he goes, that's right.
That's what I'm getting at.
He goes, you saw what happened at Fort Bragg. They put all my stuff in storage. I moved it to an apartment in Tampa that I've never seen. I don't know my son, and my wife's not part of my life. Now, since he's retired, she is again, which is great. They rekindle. But like, he was going to retire as a 4-star, and that's it. Like, he's like, man, I should have stopped when I was the 06 unit commander. Looking back, so he goes, it'll be just fine. It's still not right. It's not any easier for me than somebody that loves what they did in the Marine Corps like you. That's told now it's time, you got to stop doing that at 11 years time in service. Well, again, you just redefine what your 7 core virtues are. How is that important to you?
Gotta find it again.
And try. And to me, justice is how to live a just life. Live by convictions, not circumstances, right? There's a reason it's tattooed on my arm. And it's it worked out again. And I had a phenomenal career in the Army and in special operations, and I love what I did. And it's okay that there's somebody else that took my spot. Right? There's another 3rd group commander, and there's been three since, now a 4th one since.
It'll always keep going. We only feel like we need to be there while we're there. I think that feeling hits us all like, what will the Marine Corps do without me? What will 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines do without me? It's like, you're just a part. You're just a small little speck of sand in a machine that's just going to keep churning. And I think once guys realize that, especially in that transition piece, one, that unit's going to just keep going, and they're going to keep making commandos just like you, and they're going to keep killing people just like you did, and fighting and winning the nation's wars. That's going to happen. When you get that reality, to me, in transition, the next biggest step is to regain purpose. You got to find what's purposeful to you, because you went on a level of making an international difference of life and death, to like, what's your purpose? Now, of course, you got the fatherly purpose and the husbandly purpose, but what's that thing that drives you? What's that thing that what are you doing bigger than yourself? Because like, for a career guy in the Army, Special Forces, Marine Corps, whatever, you're a career guy, you had that purpose, just like that next promotion and that next job and the next duty station. Your purpose derived from your service, and most guys just don't even know that. They don't know that they're filling a higher purpose than themselves until that day that they're out. And I've had guys that were in combat and guys that weren't. You still served a purpose at some sort of level bigger than you. And when they get out, they're like, I don't even have PTSD, man. I just got this void and I can't get past it. It's like, yeah, because you're not serving nothing higher than you right now. You're not serving anything higher than you. And if you are, it's only minuscule. So go back and give something to somebody that you expect nothing back from. Because that's what you did your whole life. You gave something to people that will never know you, don't care to know you, don't really care what you went through. And that's okay, because kind of like subconsciously, you're not thinking about that. You know that, but you're not thinking about that. And I'm telling you, you go get back to something bigger than yourself, you'll feel that void start to close a little bit or fill a little bit, right? And so that's what I try to preach to these guys. It's not easy. Transition's not easy, especially if you don't have some sort of tools or knowledge going into transition.
And you can certainly make it harder on yourself. I didn't. I never wore my position as my own image, right? I didn't. I served in, but I learned this. I learned this in a very tough conversation I had with a mentor of mine, a guy named Mark Schwartz. He retired as a 3-star. And I was a major, finishing my time at group. I did my 3 years time as a major, left group. I was the chief of training at Army Special Operations Command. So, I had all the special skills at schools, the ammo management, 7 different branches underneath training division. And I was fucking miserable, man, living in the cubicle world in this 3-star headquarters. Building 2929 Fort Bragg's not a really great place to walk into every day when you're coming off of an operational field. And I'm like, man, and the chances to go back as a battalion commander now are real small. And I thought, man, that's it. I'm never going back to 3rd Group. And I was like in a depression, and I was just miserable. And so Mark Schwartz says, hey, man, let's go. He was the 3rd Group commander at the time. He goes, let's go have some lunch. So we got lunch. He's like, hey, how's it going? And I bitched. And he goes, man, all you've done is bitch this whole lunch. He goes, hey, so, what do you do? I was telling him, I run all the special skills, school slots. I have the staff that does that. He goes, okay, there's some E6 on an ODA somewhere that needs to go to Halo school, right? Yeah. Well, fucking make it happen. There's some Ranger platoon that's getting ready to deploy that needs the ammunition that's coming out of the USAC account, right? Well, fucking make it happen. He goes, there's just different ways of being a Green Beret. So go be the best Green Beret that you need to be for the fucking people that you're serving, whether they fucking know you're there or not. Sorry, I'm throwing the bombs out too much, but so sorry, Mom, I'm cursing too much, but
you're good.
But that was very prophetic to me. Like, no, no matter what job I'm in, just be the best Green Beret I can be. It doesn't mean I'm on an X somewhere. It doesn't mean I'm leading an indigenous force, but and so what is your purpose? Well, I'm taking care of somebody else. I'm building a team around a problem set, right? And really from that point on, I never looked at my pay grade or my position as my personality. I'm like, hey, this is a position that I have a responsibility to be the best Green Beret I can be to the people that need me to be that person. And it's from that point on, it was more resource in the individual operators and their detachments or small units of action. And using your experience to help coach those young captains through, man, trust me, I've walked a mile in these shoes, right? And not make that your personality, right? I could have gone in during my pre-mission training to every one of the ODAs in 3rd Battalion and just slammed them because I had done all of that before. No, let me help coach you on this. Let me tell you why this is what's going to be better. Yeah. And trust me on it. But, you still get, right? You get these young captains or young NCOs that are like, oh, man, what does he know? Well, I've done it already, and I fucked it up sometimes too. So just take my lessons learned, and it's okay.
And that's what I try to tell everybody is like, you can ask anybody anything, and you will always learn something because they either aced it, cool, learn everything they did to ace it, or they fucked it up. At which point you can say, here's the 6 things not to fucking do because this didn't work, right? And we can scratch that off the list. Like just knowing that, like the mentorship is huge. Ryan Holiday writes about the Stoics, and from him I get like just seeing somebody do something one time makes me infinitely better the first time I do it. Just seeing it happen, right? So if I give you a ping pong ball and 40 toothpicks and some pipe cleaners and tell you to move this ping pong ball across this table without letting it touch the table, you have 35 seconds, go. All right, well, if you've never seen that done before, 35 seconds might be a fucking tall ask. That might be a tall order, right? But if I turned on YouTube, showed you somebody do it with the same exact supplies that you gave in the time limit, how much better would you be the very first time you put it together? right? And that's what we get from reading or doing these podcasts or, interviewing somebody like yourself that's got a lot of this different knowledge or, this different experience that could get out to in podcasts because you're going to live forever. Right? These guys, they could just stack them up. Mine, 100 other ones that are doing great things. And you can start to TDG or you can start to put TDGs together for your teams. That's what I want out of it. So for every one of these things you share or another guest shares on another podcast, to take it back to kind of the beginning, it provides, an environment conducive to changing at least one person. And if you get one, then, like you said at the beginning, that's a success.
Yeah, cool. Certainly I haven't mastered it, right? Even on the back, and a little odd you started at the end or current and went backwards. But, live where you work, like what you do, like who you work with, make good money, and manage your own time, right? Those are the 5, and you define them differently. The reality is you get 3 of them, right? Because, I'd love to go deer hunting more than one time a year. I'm just not very good at managing my own time now.
Yeah. But are you in charge of your own time?
I could be more than I let myself be.
Okay.
Right. And I think that's part of me that's the part I haven't let go of yet. Right.
I think that's the biggest thing that came out of Sean Carano's interview, Honor Foundation, Sean Carano, was that he got to a point in his career where he wanted to have control of his time. And that's an important distinction because having control of your time does not mean that you're going to let yourself do a bunch of extra stuff.
Sure. I have unlimited PTO
which
in my
is
work.
what you just
I
said
don't take
just
any
now.
days off.
Right. So you don't let yourself control your time enough. And why do you think that is?
That's.
I have a similar problem. I'm curious.
For me personally, it was my work ethic and what I just literally put my heart and soul into with what I did in service. Mm-hmm. And I was all in. Right, and then that's not healthy.
And when you carried that over to your civilian job,
100% did. Right, go all in. And last weekend we took our turning 21-year-old to Vegas, and I took Friday and Monday off. Well, people from work are calling me Monday, and it's Memorial Day, right?
Oh, yeah.
Especially private equity-backed tech startups, they don't take it. Holidays. I tell people when they come out of service, like, hey, what's the biggest difference? I'm like, there's no 4-day weekends.
Yeah, man.
There's no comp days. There's no such thing as a comp day in the real world. But
that's a fact.
I've got unlimited PTO, and I don't take any days. I rarely take days off here and there. I made myself get up before daybreak today to right across the street from the front of my, you drive by my development. Mm-hmm. There's state game lands, a dove field. I went out there and smacked 3 doves and felt great and had coffee out there. Just listened to the birds chirp. And I'm like, man, why do I not do this?
And it makes you feel good to do those things, doesn't it? Even hunting or primitive stuff.
No, I love doing it.
For me, it makes me feel amazing.
I haven't given myself the latitude to not feel guilty of doing something good for myself.
Mm-mm. Well, let's talk about that.
So it's why should I have something?
Why not?
This rewarding? And I don't know. Maybe.
No, that's a way of thinking.
It could be the 60 headstones down that sidewalk. It could be I'm not. What's the purpose in what I'm doing? Right.
That's survivor's guilt.
Do I owe this time to somebody else? And don't get me wrong, it's very rewarding to do anything with my family. We're going to go tomorrow night. Oldest boy drove down from Raleigh. We're going to go watch home opener for UNCW ice hockey tomorrow. For my son's on the team. So those things I love doing. I'd also like to go deer hunting and not feel like, did I deserve this?
Okay.
And if a $60 million question, if you can tell me why I feel that way and I want to change it, I don't know. But I've had a therapist quit on me because she couldn't answer it.
Well, I'm no therapist, but I talk to a lot of guys just like you, and it sounds like survivor's guilt. It sounds like you're judging what you're allowed to feel good about because of maybe those people who don't have that, opportunity. It's kind of what it sounds like. And for me, it's just like, man, how would you feel? Like if you were one of those 60 headstones, would you want one of your guys to feel this way?
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't.
Like, hey man, go to your
You would want him to live and grow babies and go hunting and go fishing and feel all of that because that's good. and that's what we do it for, is for that good. But yeah, just to say that's the way you feel, I don't think it's bad, I don't think it's a wrong feeling.
You got to have some cornerstones. Certainly my wife.
Support.
I got a couple of good friends. There was my good friend Ted Hudson, and I retired at the same time. He was a month ahead of me, and even now we'll talk. And he was the oldest freshman in local community college to get his electrician's certification. So, and he Mustanged. He was enlisted all the way through 06, 32 years of service, and then became an electrician. And I lived at 20 Adams Street. He'll still call me. He calls me yesterday, and he's like, "Hey man, do we need another 20 Adams conversation?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, we'll do that." Right? So there's people you can have a real conversation with about anything, and you need that.
Oh yeah.
But even when you look at these the people you touch today, right? What's the common denominators? I've talked about the 7 virtues there and how you define them. That's a self thing, but there's really 2 things that, those 5 criteria for success. You got to define those for yourself, and you only get 3. There's no euphoria, and everybody needs a teacher and an opportunity. And I look back at my life from the time I was a little kid, getting told no, through even now taking a chance going into a private equity startup company. Everybody needs a teacher and an opportunity. And that's a lesson that took me a long time to recognize. Like, okay, there's some cornerstone things that create value in how you perform and how you interact with other human beings. Empathy, compassion, moral courage, right? Those things constant. You don't want to drift off those, your core values, and then be a teacher and provide an opportunity, right? Empower the individual to make their team better, whether it's Team Moses going down to UNCW tomorrow night, or it's my technicians building new software programs.
Yep.
Or it's an ODA that needs to get outfitted for their next deployment in my previous life, teacher and opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, and you should always give back, especially somebody like you, somebody that's got the experience, that's been the way through, that's fucked things up, done things really well. I mean, at least this is what I tell the Marines. It's incumbent upon us that have done these things to transfer that to this new generation. They don't have war fighters in the ranks anymore. They don't. They got some gunners and some mass sergeants. E7s and above might have a little bit of action, except for our Raider Nation. They're getting some a little bit more regularly maybe, but straight lines don't have it. Eventually, hopefully never, but the ODAs, there's people that have to carry that culture on and give back to, but it's not just that, it's out in the real world too. One of the biggest things I love doing is coaching. I coach kids. I coach the softball teams for my girls. Yeah. I coach the baseball teams for my boys, the soccer teams. Now they're asking me to coach this football team, but I take joy in that. Purpose derives in coaching. It doesn't matter if I'm coaching private sergeants over here at gunfighting at Lejeune, or if I'm coaching these kids, and sometimes I get more purpose out of, or more joy in it, coaching the kids. They're still innocent. They don't have their ways, right?
Yeah.
And nobody thinks they can do certain things. Everybody wants to put a glass on them. And it's like, no, these kids are smart, man. And you got to let them know that they're smart and what they can be about. I remember I got laughed at the last association I coached at, coaching my kids baseball, because at the end of every game or practice, I would do like a with them, like a tie-in for life. Not just like, these are 8-year-olds, okay, got it, but they should still be hearing this stuff, and I would give them like a life lesson. And the coaches, the other coaches and parents, they'd all laugh like, you're always so serious, try and bring life lessons into it. And it's like,
no, man, they'll remember that.
Yes, that's what I'm all about. I don't care that they're 8. And you know what? It's them same kids that every time I come to that field, I don't coach anymore. And now they've went from 6 and 7 years old to 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And every time I'm on the field, they run, hey, coach. I don't do that to everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I love it, from the gunfighting to baseball or t-ball or giving back. And that's another selfless service. You're not expecting anything back from them. No. You know what I mean? You're just wanting to make better people or make better soldiers or kids. So, well, dude, what are we at? We're coming on 3 hours here.
That's it. Teacher and opportunity. I gave you good close.
Teacher and an opportunity. That's I love it, man. I love it. I do want one more thing out of you. For guys that are out there right now coming through pipelines, officers and enlisted alike, that are SF on the mind and that's the way they're going, maybe that's where they're at. What do you tell somebody coming up in a let's call it non-wartime SF community?
I mean, I'll give you an example. Like, so my nephew is going through basic training there at Fort Benning, and he was desperate to come into the military. And this is my younger sister's son, Harrison, and she was very nervous about coming in because, she didn't have a lot of dealings in the military, but her brother did a lot of stuff in the military. Didn't really talk about it a whole lot with them, or certainly not with my ma. But she gets it, and she's like, I don't want him to come in this. I said, well, it's different. What does he want to do? I tried to convince him to get an MOS that, hey, you're an ankle sprain away from not being in the service anymore. Get something that's valuable. Be a communications person, be a logistician, right? Trying to steer him away from things that I know people did the same thing to me, and I ended up being a Green Beret because that's where I knew I was going to go. And I said, well, if he's going to go in, let me help him get an option 40 for the Ranger Regiment. He's still going to have to. He's still going to have to put out during basic and his advanced interval training, and then he'll get a chance at RASP and Airborne School. But if he makes it, he's going to be around people just like him. And that motivation will carry him a long way. And we had him down last summer, took him out on a fishing trip, and he was a sponge, man. What do I need to do? What do I need to do? But he wanted the cheat code, like, how many miles do I have to ruck to get ready to do this? And like, hey man,
all of them.
here's something you're never going to be able to do. You can't give 100% all the time, right? People want to say, hey, give 100% all the time. Physically, you can't endure that, right? 80% solutions don't normally do pretty well. And very simple things like be at the right place in the right uniform at the right time with something to write on or something to write with, and never pass up the opportunity to shut the fuck up. Right? Rule number one. It doesn't mean don't listen, right? And the advice when I got commissioned by Billy Goodson, he took me and my buddy Larry Burse out for a beer the night before we got commissioned, and I got in trouble and tried to blow up the barracks. And he says, hey, for the rest of your career, you guys are going to be leaders in an organization, whether it's small unit all the way up however far you go. There's two things that you need to carry on with every time you transition a new job. I said, okay, Sergeant Major, what's that? And he goes, well, keep your mouth shut and your eyes and ears open. And that it's different than what you're normally used to hearing. If you keep your ears open and your mouth shut, you'll be able to actively listen enough to know who the fuck knows what they're talking about. And build a team around those people. Extremely valuable, right? The second lieutenant didn't get it, but I valued it. And I said, okay, what's number two? And he goes, only 2 people in the Army wear stars. Sergeant majors and generals, and you don't need to fuck with either one of them. It's okay. And so I certainly, rule number 1 applies in my house. You could ask either one of my boys, and they're adults now, what's rule number 1? Never pass up the opportunity to shut the fuck up. But that's intended to be an active listener, right?
No, I get it.
And that's the advice I give people. If you're not actively listening, you're going to miss something. You're going to miss a block of instruction on where you got to be for the next movement, or where you're going to, very simple things into very important things like, hey, I wasn't listening. Now I don't know what logistic requirements I have to sustain for a period of time in a remote location, right? Any active listening. Very simple things, right? Because everybody wants to know, like, okay, what's the easy way through a Robin station? Well, there isn't, man. You just have to go through it. And be an active participant. And actively listen.
Is he in now?
He's in basic training.
He's in basic. Yeah. And did he get his contract the way he wanted it?
He did. And he had a 94 on his assessment test. He could have done anything he wanted in the Army.
Check.
But this kid is dedicated. Like, this is the young Americans that we all want to see come up. Like,
That's good.
I'm going to go serve my country. I think that's a requirement. He put that on himself. He's going to go. I think he'll succeed unless he gets hurt. And again, you're an ankle sprain away from changing your lifestyle anyhow.
Now, was his father Army as well, or no?
Absolutely not. No.
Say less, fam.
Yeah.
I won't even ask.
Yeah,
Roger that.
At some point, my family will listen to this, and I don't need.
You don't need.
They don't need to hear my opinion on his deadbeat dad.
Roger that.
But he's a good kid.
Well, good luck to him, and if we have drinks after this, maybe we catch up, see if he actually follow through that, and make it in. That'd be awesome.
Maybe you can be a deal on your sponsor here. Get a Glock 49 for me.
Yeah. I don't have a Glock 49. I don't like Glocks.
Well, but
I shoot a Muslim gun. Turkey. Mechanic.
When we go off there, I'll give my opinion on my cultural assessment of that.
That's fun. Hey, I just started shooting it. All right, guys, that's choices, not chances. Brad Moses, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you being transparent and bringing a lifetime of experiences into just a couple hours. I truly do appreciate it, and I have no doubt that that's going to be resonating within the community here. If you guys see anything that resonated with you, something that you need to share out that you know others can use or get better from, don't be selfish with the information. Share it out, and we'll catch you next time. Choices, not chances, guys.
Not too far. You're marking the building. Hit him. Yeah, that's good. That's a good shot. That's money. Yeah. Money.